It was the 138th year of the radiant moon calendar, deep in the cold of winter. I was working in the blacksmith shop on Baron Foslin's estate in the Blackwater territory of the Golden Valley Kingdom. The head blacksmith, Hawk, was a loud, rough man who never stopped yelling at us. 3 months until the exam, he'd shout. Work harder or pack your bags. None of the boys here were actual apprentices yet. We were all competing for that one spot. Most of the others were clumsy, and Hawk let them know it. But when he came to watch me, he stopped and nodded. I'd been pulling the bellows at a steady rhythm, keeping the fire just right. The moment the iron turned from dark red to orange, I grabbed it with the tongs, flipped it, and set it on the anvil, smooth, no hesitation. You're Roland, right? Not bad, he said. That was the first time he'd praised anyone, and I could feel the jealous looks burning into my back. When the lunch bell rang, I cleaned up my station and went to eat 2 pieces of black bread, a tiny scrap of cheese, and a bowl of watery vegetable soup. Back in my old life, I wouldn't have touched this stuff. But now I wolfed it all down without a second thought. See, I'm not actually from this world. I died during overtime at work. Everything went black, and I woke up here. The only thing that came with me was a kind of cheat system, like a game modifier I'd once downloaded to fully explore an RPG. Golden text floats in front of my eyes whenever I focus on it, showing my stats. Strength 1, Agility 0.8, Spirit 1.2, and 2 skills, or smelting and bellows pulling, both at level 2 and almost full-on experience. In theory, once I meet certain conditions, I can unlock all kinds of jobs and classes. But so far, nothing about a class change has appeared. If I'd known this thing would follow me here, I muttered, I would have downloaded a more broken one. My buddy Sean found me in my quiet corner. He was a big, tall guy, the opposite of me. Hawk had yelled at him again that morning, and Sean admitted he'd probably wash out soon. He didn't want to go home and take over his father's butchering trade, especially with his dad and Uncle Peyton fighting all the time. Instead, he had his eye on joining the military. Word was that monsters from the Black Fir Forest had been attacking villages, and the Baron had ordered Knight Beckham to raise soldiers to fight them. Sean flexed his thick arms and grinned. With my build, I'll make it into Beckham's company for sure. Maybe even become a knight squire. You'll have to bow to me then. I didn't laugh. Are those monsters really that dangerous? They need to send knights? Who knows? Sean shrugged. But no monster can stand against someone with a transcendent class. He turned serious for a moment and asked if I felt ready for the exam. I looked down at my thin body and shook my head. Unlike Sean, I had no backup plan. My mother died when I was young. My father, sick and on his deathbed, sold our only mud brick house just to pay for me to come here and learn a trade. If I passed the exam, I'd be set. Even a noble's blacksmith apprentice lived well and ranked above common freemen. But if I failed, I shuddered. Dying broke and homeless as a person from another world? That would be pathetic. And the odds weren't great. Dozens of boys had come to compete, many of them sons of blacksmiths who'd been learning since childhood. Only one would be chosen. Before Sean could comfort me, Hawk's booming voice cut through the air. Get over here, all of you. No slacking. I stood up, dusted off my pants, and shook my head clear. Whatever happened, I just needed to max out my smelting and bellows pulling skills first, worry about the rest later. So I went back to the forge and kept grinding. Pull the bellows. Burn the ore. Over and over, boring as it was, that golden text kept flashing with every correct move, giving me 1 more point of experience each time, and that kept me going. Then, after I lost track of how long I'd been at it, the messages changed. Bellows pulling skill has reached maximum level. Ore smelting skill has reached maximum level. Detection complete. You may now take the basic class, Blacksmith Apprentice. Requirements: Strength 1, Agility 0.5, 2 max level forging-related skills. Accept class? Accept class. I didn't hesitate for a second. Since my cheat system lets me hold multiple classes eventually, it didn't matter which one I picked first. And honestly, in my situation, anything was a step up. Even if the system had offered me a job shoveling manure, I'd have taken it. The golden text flashed before my eyes. Class accepted. Current class, Blacksmith Apprentice. Attribute bonus gained, Strength 1, Agility 0.5. Trade acquired, the Humble Apprentice. The Humble Apprentice, significantly increases learning efficiency for forging-related knowledge. A surge of power flooded through my body out of nowhere. The iron tongs that had felt heavy in my hands just moments ago now seemed almost light. I wanted to take a moment to explore these changes, but Hawk's booming voice cut in right on cue. "Boys, gather round." We all dropped our tools and rushed over. This was the part of the day when Hawk personally taught us forging techniques. If you wanted to pass the exam, you had to at least master the basics of hammering metal. He placed a heated metal ingot on the anvil, picked up his hammer, and went to work. With each precise strike, the rough surface smoothed out, the shapeless lumps stretching and narrowing until, in just minutes, there it was, the rough shape of a dagger. "Strength, rhythm, and placement," he said, breaking down every move. "Get any one of them wrong and the metal cracks." The boys from blacksmith families were nodding along, eyes bright. But most of the others looked completely lost. Hawk's explanations were thorough, but they were packed with jargon and covered too much ground at once. Before today, I'd been just as confused as everyone else. But now, something was different. It was like my brain had shifted into a new gear. All those complicated techniques that used to go right over my head suddenly unfolded clearly, piece by piece, each concept clicking into place as fast as Hawk could speak. That trait, the humble apprentice, was already working. When Hawk finished, he tossed the rough dagger blank into a bucket of cold water and set down his hammer. "All right, who wants to try?" A confident voice spoke up before anyone else could move. "Let me, Master Hawk." It was Marco, a tall, well-built boy whose father was the most famous blacksmith in all of Blackwater territory. Even the Baron treated his family with respect. Everyone knew what crossing Marco meant, so the other boys quietly stepped aside. Marco hammered the glowing ingot with practiced hands. A few cracks appeared on the surface, but the shape he produced wasn't far off from Hawk's demonstration. Hawk frowned, studied it for a moment, then said, "Your rhythm needs work. But you pass." Marco beamed and strutted back into the crowd like a conquering hero. After him, several others tried, and got torn apart. "Useless. Were you even listening?" Hawk roared. "Strength, rhythm, and placement, all three matter. Is this how I taught you? Get out of my sight." His fury hit us like thunder. Every boy flinched. After catching his breath, Hawk growled. Anyone else? Dead silence. Nobody dared look him in the eye. That's when I stepped forward. "Master Hawk, let me try." Whispers broke out behind me. "Who is he?" "Some kid named Roland. Apparently he's good at smelting ore." Hawk even praised him this morning. One of the boys who'd just been screamed at scoffed, red-faced. "So what if he can burn rocks?" "That's nothing compared to actual forging." Hawk didn't pay attention to any of them. He just nodded and handed me the hammer. I took it, stood before the anvil, and breathed deep. All the knowledge Hawk had just taught us came alive in my mind, swirling, organizing itself, settling into a clear set of steps I could actually follow. I brought the hammer down. "You have successfully performed a forging action. 1 experience. You have learned the skill, forging." My heart jumped. First try, I'd unlocked the skill on my very first swing. My previous skills, bellows pulling and/or smelting, had each taken dozens of attempts before they even activated, and earning experience points required every part of the technique to be perfect. But now, after becoming a blacksmith apprentice and gaining that humble apprentice trait, a single hammer strike was enough. So this is what a class change really means. Keep going. "What are you standing around for?" Hawk's shout snapped me back to reality, and I started swinging the hammer again. But even though all that forging knowledge had clicked together in my head, putting it into practice was a different story. My next few strikes were clumsy and rough. Honestly, even Marco's work looked better than mine at that point. The other boys started snickering. "That's the guy who dared step up? Look at his arms, thin as sticks. He'll run out of strength in no time." Hawk didn't say anything, but I could see his fingers tapping impatiently against his arm. He wasn't impressed either. I blocked it all out and just kept hammering. With every swing, the golden text flashed in my eyes, 1 experience point after another. And with each point, I understood the skill a little more deeply. The hammer started feeling less like a tool and more like part of my own arm. Every strike landed more accurately than the last, with better force and better aim. Hawk's frown slowly faded. I even caught a flicker of surprise on that stern face of his. The whispers around me changed too. "Wait, He's almost as good as Marco now. Is his father some famous blacksmith or something? When I struck the final blow and looked down at the anvil, there it was, the rough shape of a dagger. The surface was still uneven, but there were no cracks at all. It wasn't fine work by any stretch, but with a little grinding, it could actually be used. Master Hawk, what do you think? He walked over, picked up my dagger blank, and turned it in his hands, studying it carefully. Roland, was it? What did you do before coming here? I trained horses for the Baron, same as my father. Horses? Ever done any metalwork before? No, sir. He looked me in the eye for a long moment, and I held his gaze without flinching. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward, just barely, before he spun around and held up my dagger blank for everyone to see. Take a good look, he roared. This is what forging looks like. Some of you come from blacksmith families, and you can't even match a stable boy. Each of you grab an ingot and forge something to this standard. Anyone who can't manage it goes hungry tonight and spends the evening staring at the furnace. Groans filled the room. Then Hawk turned back to me and clapped my shoulder hard. From now on, you work as my personal assistant. Forget everything else. Just focus on helping me. Understood? Yes, sir. My heart was racing. Being Hawk's assistant meant I'd have plenty of time to practice forging, and more importantly, it meant I'd won his favor. Baron Foslin's territory wasn't wealthy. The man could barely afford to keep one knight, and Hawk was the only dedicated blacksmith in the entire domain. Earning Hawk's approval meant I already had 1 foot past the exam's finish line. After Hawk left, I stood there thinking about what had just happened. The humble apprentice trait was even more powerful than I'd imagined. It didn't just help me understand what I'd been struggling with. It made learning any blacksmith skill twice as fast. And this was just a basic class. What about other classes? If I kept stacking up jobs, piling attributes and traits and skills on top of each other. A thick arm wrapped around my neck and a loud voice bellowed in my ear. Way to go, Roland. I knew you had it in you. Sean, of course. I sighed. Calm down, will you? How can I calm down? Hawk used your work as the standard. That old grouch has never praised anyone like that. Yeah, sure. But maybe you should worry about whether you'll get to eat tonight. That shut him up. I pulled him over to the anvil and walked him through the basics of hammering while we talked. After a while, my adrenaline faded and exhaustion hit me like a wave. My arms were so sore I could barely feel them. Just one rough dagger, and I'm completely spent. 2 points of strength is nowhere near enough. The only quick way to boost my stats is to pick up another class, but for that I need to learn the right skills first. What I really needed was a combat class. This world had monsters roaming the Black Fir Forest and powerful warriors like knights with superhuman abilities. Without some way to fight, I was helpless. But I had no money and no connections. Where was someone like me supposed to learn combat skills? Then Sean leaned in close, checking that nobody was nearby, and whispered, Roland, watch your back. Marco didn't look happy earlier. Remember that guy Landers? He was even more talented than Marco at forging. Then one day he had a private meeting with Marco, and after that he just disappeared, left the estate, and nobody ever saw him again. I glanced over. Sure enough, Marco was staring at me from across the room, muttering to the boys around him. The look on his face made it clear he wasn't saying anything nice. Don't worry too much, though, Sean said, flexing his bicep. This is the Baron's estate. Marco wouldn't dare try anything here. And if something does happen, I've got your back. Thanks, Sean. I smiled, but I didn't let my guard down. Without me in the picture, that apprentice spot in 3 months would be Marco's for the taking. Threatening someone's livelihood is as good as threatening their life, especially when that livelihood is a position as a noble's personal blacksmith. Between Marco and the monsters and the superhumans in this world, danger was everywhere. I needed to learn some combat skills and pick up a fighting class for the stat boosts and for basic self-defense. But how? Then an idea hit me, and I turned to look at Sean, clumsily hammering away at his ingot. Sean, didn't you once tell me your Uncle Peyton is a mercenary? Yeah. Sean tossed down his hammer in frustration after cracking yet another ingot. He used to work around the Black Fir Forest, hunting monsters for money. Made a decent living from it too. Hunting monsters, that got my attention. I'd heard that monster activity across the Golden Valley Kingdom had been getting worse every year. The local lords didn't have enough soldiers, so they had to hire adventurers and mercenaries. The pay was good, but most of them never came back alive. If Sean's uncle could actually make a living doing that, he had to be a skilled fighter. Did he ever teach you any combat skills? I asked hopefully. Sean shook his head with a bitter smile. I wish. My father never approved of Uncle Peyton's lifestyle. Peyton left home when I was little. If it weren't for some recent trouble, I probably would never have seen him again. I tried to hide my disappointment, but Sean noticed. Why? You want to learn how to use weapons? Yeah, I said. Monsters have been showing up even in the neighboring Morning Light territory. I figured I should learn something for self-defense. Sean thought for a moment, then perked up. Tell you what, next month is the Feast of the Heavenly Father. Every year the Baron throws a big party and invites the surrounding nobles, which means commoners like us get kicked out of the estate for a few days. Come stay at my house. We can ask Uncle Peyton to teach us some fighting moves. Really? Sean, you're the best. I punched his chest in excitement, but then quickly calmed down. I knew enough about mercenaries to understand how they operated. They didn't do anything for free. Peyton might teach Sean since he's family, but a stranger like me? Not likely. And I couldn't afford to wait for Sean to learn everything and then pass it on to me. I needed those skills now. Better think of a way to get on Peyton's good side, I told myself. Hey Sean, what kind of things does your uncle like? He scratched his head. Weapons, probably. He's been trying to borrow money from my dad to buy a new sword, but a decent iron sword costs a fortune. That's actually why they keep fighting. Weapons that I could work with. I'd just become a blacksmith apprentice, and while my forging wasn't great yet, the feast was still weeks away. With the humble apprentice trait boosting my learning speed, if I grinded the forging skill hard enough, I could probably hammer out a decent weapon by then. I felt the coins in my pocket, just over a dozen coppers. Enough to buy a small metal ingot for making a dagger. Even if Peyton didn't care for a dagger, I could sell it and find another way to learn combat skills. The only question was whether Hawk would let me use the forging tools on my own time and take the finished weapon off the estate. I'd have to feel him out on that in the coming days. For now, I went back to coaching Sean through his forging. With my help, he barely managed to produce an acceptable rough blank by sunset. When the dinner bell rang, Sean practically dragged me to the dining hall. Dinner was a little better than lunch, the same black bread and soup, but with a small fish and some fish broth added. The cooking was terrible, the fish was kind of rank, and the broth had no flavor at all. But I wasn't complaining. A free meal was a free meal. I was just tearing the bread and fish into pieces to soak in the broth, my own version of lamb stew, when I heard heavy footsteps approaching. I looked up and saw Marco walking toward me with a group of boys trailing behind him. Sean immediately stuffed his last chunk of bread into his mouth, gripped his wooden food tray like a weapon, and stood in front of me. Relax, Marco said with a thin smile, looking past Sean directly at me. You're Roland, right? I assume you know who I am. I stood up, patted Sean's tense shoulder, and met Marco's gaze. Of course. What can I do for you, mister? Marco, he seemed pleased by the respectful tone. I'll get straight to the point. He held up one finger. Leave the estate. Drop out of the exam in 3 months. In return, I'll pay you 1 gold coin. What do you say? 1 gold coin, Sean blurted out before I could respond. In the Golden Valley Kingdom, a family of 3 could live for a whole year on 3 to 5 silver coins. At 100 silver to 1 gold, a single gold coin could support an ordinary family for decades. Sean's father was a butcher, one of the better-paying jobs a commoner could get, and even he had never seen or touched a real gold coin. Marco's smile widened at Sean's reaction, a hint of contempt in his eyes. But then his smile froze. Because unlike Sean, I didn't flinch. I just frowned slightly and shook my head. 1 gold coin, I'm sorry, Mr. Marco. I'll have to decline. That's a generous offer. I'd advise you not to get greedy. Marco's face darkened as he sized me up. Messy black hair, skinny frame, worn-out clothes made of rough hemp. Nothing about me looked like someone who could turn down that kind of money. But I kept my voice calm. Mr. Marco, I'm not trying to bargain. I simply love the craft of forging. That's all. He swallowed whatever threat he'd been about to make, let out a cold snort, and walked away. Sean didn't breathe again until Marco was completely out of sight. Roland, that was a gold coin. So what? I plopped down on the creaky bench and stuffed the soggy bread into my mouth. You really think someone like Marco would keep his word? Well, no, but still. 1 gold. He trailed off, then dropped onto the bench beside me, staring at nothing. I didn't blame him. 1 gold coin could feed an ordinary family for decades. Even I had felt a moment of temptation, but I thought it through. In this world, commoners' lives were worth less than weeds. The only way up for someone like me, besides some distant path to superhuman power, was passing that exam and becoming a proper blacksmith apprentice. And with my cheat system, becoming a master blacksmith was only a matter of time. Once I got there, even nobles and superhumans would have to treat me with respect. No single gold coin could buy that future. Sean snapped out of it and grabbed my shoulder. That jerk Marco won't let this go. Inside the estate we're safe, but during the festival we'll have to leave. Maybe you could ask Hawk to talk to the Baron. Hawk is just a commoner too, I said, draining my fish soup. And I can't hide inside these walls forever. Then I'll protect you. No matter what happens. That's what brothers do. I grinned. Deal. Next time we raid old Frank's fruit trees, I'll be the lookout. No way. I can't even climb that high. We laughed our way back to the bunkhouse. Lying on the hard bed, I took a deep breath and pushed down my fear. Was I scared of Marco's revenge? Of course I was. I was just a blacksmith apprentice with zero combat ability. But fear wasn't going to stop me. I've already died once, I mumbled, and drifted off to sleep. The days that followed were quiet. Marco didn't show his face again, and I threw myself into forging. The big difference now was that I didn't have to run around doing odd jobs anymore. I worked right beside Hawk at the anvil, hammering metal all day. Keep your rhythm. Don't lose focus, he'd bark. More force. Yes, like that. After one session, I shook out my aching arms and asked, "How was that one, Master Hawk?" Better than before. But not good enough to pass the exam yet. Work harder. Yes, sir. Hawk laughed at that. A real full laugh, and slapped my shoulders so hard I stumbled. Seeing him in a good mood, I took a breath and asked the question I'd been rehearsing for days. "Master Hawk, I have a friend whose birthday is coming up. Would it be possible for me to use the shop tools to forge a weapon as a gift? I'd pay for the metal ingot, of course." He looked at me for a moment. If anyone else had asked, he probably would have shouted them out of the room. But I'd been obedient, hardworking, and talented. What teacher wouldn't cut that kind of student some slack? He leaned in and said quietly, "Boy, you've worked with enough metal by now to know there's always some waste material left over." My eyes lit up. He was telling me I could use the scrap metal for free. Just this once. Don't make a habit of it, understand? Yes. Thank you, Master Hawk. And if the gate guards ask, drop my name. I've got other things to handle. If you need ingots for practice, help yourself. No need to ask me every time. The other boys stared at me with naked envy. They only got one ingot each during scheduled practice. I could take as many as I wanted. That's not fair. Even Marco doesn't get that treatment. I ignored them and grabbed an ingot. Since Hawk was letting me use metal for free, there was no need to spend my coppers on a small piece for a dagger. I could forge something better for Sean's uncle, and maybe even make some simple weapons for myself. But first things first, max out the forging skill. I hammered away, hour after hour, the golden experience numbers ticking upward with every strike. My arms burned, my back ached. But seeing that progress bar climb kept me going. I lost track of time. Then, finally, the familiar golden text changed. Forging skill has reached maximum level. Finally maxed out, I let out a long breath and pulled up my status panel. Strength, 2.1. Agility, 1.4. Spirit, 1.2. 3 skills all at max level, or smelting, bellows pulling, and forging. It looked like daily physical work could raise my stats a tiny bit, but the growth was painfully slow. What bothered me was that maxing out forging hadn't triggered a class upgrade. I went over everything in my head. Tempering and quenching were already part of the ore smelting and forging skills, and I couldn't think of any other smithing technique I'd missed. Maybe leveling up skills alone wasn't enough. Maybe there was some other requirement I didn't know about yet. I decided to stop worrying about it and focus on what I could do. The Feast of the Heavenly Father was 2 weeks away, and I needed to forge weapons before then. I grabbed a thick metal ingot, found a quiet corner of the shop, checked that nobody was watching, and got to work. Bellows, smelting, hammering, quenching, tempering, polishing. Every step was second nature by now. 5 days later, I held up a finished iron sword and allowed myself a tired smile. A normal person would need years to go from learning the basics to forging a complete weapon. I'd done it in months, thanks to my system. But when I gave the sword a few test swings, my excitement faded. The quality was only passable, nowhere near Hawk's standards. This level of skill might not be enough to guarantee passing the exam. Then golden text flashed across my vision. Detection complete. You have successfully forged a weapon of acceptable quality. You may advance to the upper tier class, Blacksmith. Requirements: Strength 4, Agility 2, 3 max level forging skills, forge 1/10 weapons of acceptable quality. You do not currently meet the advancement conditions. My heart jumped, then sank. For strength and 2 agility? That was way beyond my current stats. Grinding daily activities would take months to get there. The fastest way was to pick up another class for the attribute bonuses. But even though I didn't know yet what trait the blacksmith class would give me, it had to be forging related. If I could advance, passing the exam would be a sure thing. That thought lifted my spirits. I rested briefly, then grabbed another ingot. Hawk had said I could use as many as I wanted, and these were the Baron's materials, not mine. I wasn't going to feel guilty about it. Every weapon I forged would also count toward the 10 I needed for the class upgrade. So I kept hammering, day after day. Before the festival even arrived, all of us apprentice candidates were kicked out of the estate. At the gate, a guard stopped me and eyed the bundle I was carrying. I mentioned Hawk's name, and the guard's expression went from suspicious to respectful in an instant. Another reminder of how much weight a blacksmith carried in this world. Sean didn't notice any of that. The second we were cleared, he grabbed my arm and dragged me through the gate, ranting about how Hawk had just announced there'd be a literacy test when we returned. Can you believe it? Reading and writing. Good thing I'm joining the army. I always hated letters. I laughed, but inside I felt uneasy. The original Roland had learned basic reading and writing at a church school as a kid, but that wasn't nearly enough to meet Hawk's standards. And in the Golden Valley Kingdom, commoners who wanted real literacy had only 2 options: hire an expensive tutor or join the church and study prayers under a priest. Neither was possible for me right now. Sean grabbed my heavy bundle and asked what was inside. "I'll show you when we get to your house," I said. The bundle held the weapons I'd forged in secret, swords, and other gear. Even Sean didn't know about them. Hawk may have given me permission to use the metal, but the fewer people who knew, the better. We pushed through the festive crowds. The village was alive with color, dyed linen streamers hanging from oak eaves, 3 bards tuning lutes outside a tavern, roast goose smell drifting through the streets, a traveling theater troupe performing magic tricks in the church square. It was my first time outside the estate since arriving in this world, and I took it all in. I spotted Marco's father's blacksmith shop near the river, big, busy, and thriving. That was the competition. "Hey, what's in this thing?" "It's heavy," Sean called from behind me. "Wait till we get to your place." When we finally reached Sean's house and were about to push open the door, a fierce argument erupted from inside. "Peyton, I swear this is the last time. Just lend me a little more money, and then, forget it." "Sam, have you forgotten what happened to Reuben? That kind of thing isn't for people like us. And what you have is just a fragment. Damn it, don't bring up that idiot Reuben. I'm nothing like him. How are you any different?" "You're both." "Enough." The shouting inside cut off abruptly. A thin figure shoved open the door and stormed past us without a word. Then a bigger man appeared in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with a hawk nose and sharp eyes set deep in a hard, angular face. He glanced at Sean and me, then took off after the first man, disappearing down the street. "That was my Uncle Peyton," Sean said awkwardly, lowering the hand he'd raised to wave. We went inside. The house was simple but clean. Sean's father was out selling meat at his shop. Sean tossed my bundle onto the wooden table with a thud and stared at it. "So, what is it?" I checked that nobody else was around, then nodded at the bundle. "Open it yourself." He unwrapped the cloth, and 3 iron swords tumbled out. His face went blank, then his jaw dropped. Heavenly Father above, he grabbed one by the hilt and held it high, eyes wide. After standing frozen for a long moment, he turned to me. Where did you get these?" "I forged them myself." He didn't doubt me, but I could see a flash of frustration cross his face. We'd both been learning under Hawk, yet he could barely hammer out a rough blank while I was already making finished weapons. But that feeling passed quickly. He seemed to remind himself that this genius blacksmith was his best friend, and a big goofy grin spread across his face as he cradled the sword against his chest. "Are you going to sell them?" he asked. "My dad says it's illegal to sell weapons without being in the blacksmith guild." but I could ask around at the tavern for you. That warmed my heart. When I'd first arrived in this world, I was so scrawny that the other boys bullied me constantly. Sean was the one who always stepped in. Without him protecting me, I never could have focused on training. A single sword wasn't nearly enough to repay that debt. Put it away? What for? I said. Your birthday's in a few months. This is my gift to you. A gift? For me? His eyes went wide and his hands started shaking. This big, loud guy who was never careful about anything was suddenly handling the sword like it was made of glass. It's too expensive. I've never bought a weapon, but a real iron sword has to be worth. I pushed the sword into his arms. Didn't you say we're brothers? Brothers. He repeated the word, then bear hugged me so hard my bones cracked. Lighter. Lighter. After I pried myself free, I pointed to the other item in the bundle, a flat piece of iron with 2 cloth straps. Sean held it up, confused. I took a deep breath. Honestly, it looked pretty rough. I tied it over his left chest. It's a heart guard. If someone aims a blade at your heart, this might stop it. Sean flicked the iron plate with his finger, ding, and slapped my shoulder. You're a forging genius. Genius, I muttered with a weak smile. I wouldn't exactly call that crude piece of metal genius work. We'd just finished putting everything away when heavy footsteps sounded outside. Peyton walked in with a dark expression, grabbed a small wooden barrel from under the counter, popped the cork, and took several long swallows. The sour-sweet smell of fruit wine filled the room. He wiped his chin with his sleeve and smirked at Sean. What's the matter? Did the noble lord kick you out for being useless? No, we just got time off for the festival, Sean said, used to the teasing. Then he jumped straight to the point. Uncle Peyton, please teach us swordsmanship. Knight Beckham is recruiting soldiers to fight the monsters in the Black Fir Forest after the festival. I want to enlist, but all I have is brute strength. Peyton's gaze slid over to me. I put on a humble smile. I'm very interested in learning swordplay too, Uncle Peyton. He set down the barrel and gave us a sly, fox-like grin. Funny you should ask. Swords happen to be my specialty. I could teach you. But what are you offering as tuition? Tuition? Sean sputtered. Uncle, I'm your nephew. Don't pull that card on me. Peyton took another swig and belched. You know what the retired soldiers at the training grounds charge? 10 silver coins a month. He leaned in with a mock fatherly expression. But since we're family, I'll give you a discount. 5 silver coins. How about it, Uncle Peyton? That's robbery, Sean shouted. While those two argued over money, I sighed to myself. I'd expected mercenaries to be greedy, but charging your own nephew? Still, I'd planned for this. I pulled Sean aside and whispered my idea. He reluctantly went to the back room and came out with one of the iron swords. I took it, stepped forward with a polite smile, and presented it to Peyton. Uncle Peyton, Sean has been worried about you needing a new weapon. He got this sword at a discount from Master Hawk's shop. Peyton's eyes locked onto the blade immediately. He snatched it up, but after a few seconds of inspection, his excitement cooled. This quality is really from Hawk's Forge. One of his apprentices made it, I said smoothly. Sean couldn't afford anything better. Peyton glanced past me at Sean, who was still looking annoyed, then shrugged. Fine, since the kid went to the trouble. You too, follow me to the backyard. Sean fumed the whole way. That sword you made is worth several silver coins at least. And he just let it go, I told him. I'd already done the math. Once I passed the exam and became a real apprentice, I could forge as many swords as I wanted. Right now, what mattered was learning combat skills and unlocking a new class. Peyton himself had said training grounds charged 10 silver a month for lessons. Trading one mediocre sword for proper instruction was a bargain. Peyton tossed us each a wooden practice sword and started teaching. The basics were straightforward: slash, chop, thrust, plus blocking and deflecting. The real challenge was learning how to generate power from your whole body and coordinate your footwork. To my surprise, Peyton was a patient teacher. He adjusted my elbow with his wooden sword. Lower your wrist. There, hold it steady. He tapped my knee. Sink your weight. You think you're chopping firewood? Sean laughed and immediately got scolded. Your thrusts are limp as noodles. 50 more. I slowed down and focused on feeling the power travel up from my heels, through my back, into my arms. Yes, Peyton barked so suddenly I almost dropped my sword. That's it. Remember how that felt? When I asked why I kept losing balance on the recovery, he darted forward and drew a circle around my feet with his sword tip. Look at your stance. Your feet are practically glued together like a fence post. You need to be a tree with roots, not a leaf blowing in the wind. He demonstrated a proper finishing stance, his boot grinding a clean half-circle in the dirt. As the sun went down, Sean wandered off to make dinner, and Peyton dozed under a tree. But I kept swinging. Slash. Chop. Thrust. Over and over, my soaked shirt clinging to my back, the wooden sword cutting through the quiet evening air. On my very last swing, golden text blazed in front of my eyes. Skill acquired. Basic swordsmanship, level 1. Detection complete. You may now take the basic class. Recruit. Requirements. Strength 2, Agility 1, any level 1 combat skill. Accept class? Just as I thought, I smiled through my exhaustion. Learning a combat skill had unlocked a combat class. Exactly what I'd hoped for. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the dusty ground, every muscle screaming. But my eyes were brighter than they'd ever been. Nearby, Peyton cracked one eye open and muttered, "Finally gave up? Kid's got guts, I'll give him that." He didn't think much of my chances with a sword. I was too scrawny. Years as a mercenary had taught him that no amount of technique could overcome a huge gap in raw strength. He figured I'd probably fail the blacksmith exam too, and was already thinking about asking some tavern owner he knew if they needed a helper. But underneath that gruff exterior, Peyton had his principles. He knew perfectly well that the sword wasn't Sean's idea. His nephew didn't have that kind of cunning. And since he'd accepted the gift, he felt obligated to repay it somehow. He never liked owing people. I knew none of that. I was just kneeling in the dirt, catching my breath, heart pounding with excitement. Accept class. Recruit. Class accepted. Current class. Recruit. Attribute bonus gained. Strength 1, Agility 1. Trait acquired. Battle readiness. Battle readiness. Increases training effectiveness for all combat-related skills. 3 points of strength now. Still not as strong as Sean, but probably a bit above most of the boys at the smithy. I clenched my fists and felt the new power flowing through me. Then I read the trait description again, and my eyes went wide. I grabbed the wooden sword and ran through the basic swordsmanship routine one more time. When I finished the last move, golden text appeared. You have successfully completed a basic swordsmanship training session. 2 experience points. 2 points. Not 1, 2. I'd assumed battle readiness would work like the humble apprentice trait, helping me learn combat skills faster. But this was much simpler and more powerful. It just straight up doubled my experience gain. A permanent double XP card for anything combat related. In this world, even talented fighters might spend their whole lives trying to master a single weapon. With this trait, no matter what combat skill I trained, swords, spears, bows, even the special combat arts I'd heard existed, I'd improve at twice the normal rate. Then more golden text appeared, and my heart nearly stopped. Blacksmith Apprentice class detected. Class resonance triggered. Class resonance. Blacksmith Apprentice recruit. Bonus acquired. Steel through tempering. Steel through tempering. Increases strength cap and strength growth efficiency. A strange energy surged through my body. The muscle soreness from all that sword practice faded almost instantly. I rubbed my chin, thinking hard about what strength cap increase meant. Normally, a person's maximum strength is limited by their body. Someone with a small frame can never match someone built like Sean, no matter how hard they train. But if my cap was raised, did that mean my body would grow bigger? Or would my muscles become denser and stronger without changing size? Either way, for someone as scrawny as me, this was incredible. Then my mind started racing. In the original game this system came from, only combat classes and life classes could resonate with each other, and each character could only have one of each. But my modifier let me hold unlimited classes. Could I trigger unlimited resonances? Maybe even between 2 combat classes or 2 life classes. The recruit class didn't even exist in the original game, so the rules had clearly changed. If my theory was right. Roland? Sean's voice snapped me back. He was standing there with a wooden spoon, looking confused. "I've been calling you. Dinner's ready." "Oh, right. Suddenly I was starving. I leaned up and hooked my arm around Sean's neck as we walked inside. "I didn't know you could cook. Should I be worried about passing out after eating? Hey, don't underestimate me." Dinner was great. A big pot of oat and bean porridge, boiled cabbage, and salted scraps from his father's butcher shop. Way better than the stingy portions at the estate. Sean's father Gary came home while we ate. He was built like Peyton but had a much kinder face and a warm personality. He welcomed me happily, though his mood soured whenever Peyton's name came up. I collapsed into bed right after dinner and slept like the dead. The next morning, festival noise woke me up. Sean was already dressed in new clothes, fighting with his curly hair in front of a mirror. Finally awake. There's a dance at the church square at noon. Emily's going to be there. Emily was supposedly the prettiest girl in the village, at least according to Sean. He never shut up about her. But coming from my old world, village dances and local beauties didn't exactly excite me. I'll pass. Have fun without me. What? But there'll be so many pretty girls. I ignored him, got dressed, and walked straight to the yard. Practicing swordsmanship and getting stronger mattered far more to me right now. Even with the recruit class boost, my strength was still short of what I needed for the blacksmith upgrade. So what are you going to do all day? Sean asked, deflated. Practice my sword. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. The Feast of the Heavenly Father was the biggest holiday of the year, and I was spending it swinging a wooden sword alone in the backyard. But after watching me start my drills, he went quiet. When I finished the last form and lowered my sword, I noticed Sean was still standing there. He hadn't left. Aren't you going to the festival? I asked, wiping sweat from my forehead. If you're not going, I'm not going. Sean shook his head and picked up a wooden sword. Come on, I'm not a kid. You don't need to babysit me. No way, he cut in. I promise to protect you. What if Marco shows up while I'm gone? I couldn't help laughing. What about your Emily? Not asking her to dance. Forget it. He swung the sword half-heartedly. Pretty girls aren't as important as brothers. Besides, even if I went, she probably wouldn't pick me as a partner anyway. That cracked me up. He turned red and yelled at me to stop laughing, then muttered something about how it was unbelievable that I'd rather practice boring swordsmanship than enjoy the biggest holiday of the year. We trained together all morning. Around noon, Peyton finally stumbled out, rubbing his eyes. He stared at me for a moment, and I caught a flicker of surprise on his face, like he couldn't believe how much my swordsmanship had improved overnight. Sean told Peyton about his plan to enlist at the recruitment post near the Black Fir Forest after the festival. His eyes were shining as he talked about becoming a knight squire and fighting alongside real superhumans. I sighed quietly. I'd already tried talking him out of it multiple times, laying out every danger I could think of, but he'd just laugh it off. That was Sean, gentle on the outside, stubborn as a mule on the inside. Becoming a knight squire was his lifelong dream, and no amount of arguing would change his mind. All I could do was hope that the sword and heartguard I'd made would keep him safe. Peyton didn't share my worries. He said the creatures in the forest were just weak, green-skinned monsters who'd gotten lucky raiding undefended villages. With a real knight leading the charge, they didn't stand a chance. Letting Sean go would be good experience. Then Peyton said something that caught my attention. When Sean gushed about how powerful knights were, Peyton snorted. Strong? There are plenty of things in this world more powerful than knights. Sean turned red with anger. Nobody was allowed to insult knights in front of him. But Peyton seemed to remember something unpleasant and went quiet. He let out a bitter laugh and walked away without explaining. That left me wondering, were there other types of superhumans in this world besides knights? But nobody answered that question because Peyton didn't come back until long after dark. What I didn't know was what was happening that same night at the village tavern. While the rest of the village slept off the festival, Marco slipped through the tavern door wearing a hooded cloak and cloth wrapped around his face. The old bartender, Lauren, barely glanced up. He was used to strange-looking mercenary types passing through. Marco found who he was looking for in the darkest corner, a tall, gaunt man in worn-out leather armor, nursing a mug of ale alone. His name was Sam, the same man I'd seen arguing with Peyton at Sean's house. Marco slapped a pouch on the table. 2 silver coins and a sketch, a drawing of my face with my name written on it. 1 more silver when it's done, Marco said. Sam studied the picture. What do you want me to do? Marco leaned forward, candlelight dancing in his eyes. He was burning with jealousy. All those sleepless nights he'd spent practicing, all those calluses on his hands, and then I'd come along and stolen Hawk's approval right out from under him. Passing the exam meant everything to him. Inheriting his father's shop, serving a noble family, maybe even connecting with Knight Beckham. He wasn't going to let anyone ruin that. Every word came out through clenched teeth. His right hand. Destroy it. Basic swordsmanship has reached maximum level. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and smiled. Unlike the forging skills that needed level 3 to max out, basic swordsmanship capped at level 2. It was that simple. With the battle readiness trait doubling my experience, just one day of hard practice had been enough to hit the ceiling. Still, it's only basic swordsmanship, I told myself, giving the wooden sword a few swings. At best, I was slightly better than a trained militia fighter. But at least I wasn't completely helpless anymore. Sean came out carrying 2 gray robes and 2 sheathed iron swords. I'd asked him to get these ready. The robes were loose enough to hide the weapons underneath, important in a village this close to the Black Fir Forest, where desperate mercenaries might kill you over something as valuable as an iron sword. "Did you say goodbye to your family?" I asked as we set off toward the Baron's estate. "Told my dad. Uncle Peyton never came home last night, but that's normal for him." We walked along the dirt road through bare winter trees, Sean chattering happily about his plans for enlisting. Meanwhile, I was running through my own problems in my head. Basic swordsmanship was maxed. I needed to learn more skills, but training was expensive. Peyton charged 5 silver coins, and I was broke. I couldn't forge another sword as payment either. Hawk had said it was a one-time thing, and I still needed to raise my strength for the blacksmith class upgrade. Then my ears caught something. A twig snapping behind us. Underneath our footsteps, there was a third set, someone trying to walk quietly. I pretended to adjust my clothes and glanced back. A tall figure was following us, about 20 paces behind. "Sean." I gripped his shoulder and cut him off mid-sentence. "Someone's following us." He started to turn around, but I caught his wrist. "Don't look, you're overthinking it," he said, staring stiffly forward. "Lots of people use this road." I quickened our pace and whispered my plan. Then we both broke into a jog and ducked into the dense woods beside the path. When the man pushed through the branches after us, I was waiting. "Excuse me, sir. Are you following us?" I studied his face, tall, gaunt, tired eyes. I'd seen him somewhere before. He wasn't flustered at all. He just grinned. "Sharp kid. Since you caught me, I'll be straight with you. Someone paid me for one of your arms." He drew 2 rusty daggers and spun them between his fingers. "You want to do it yourself? Or should I?" It took me about half a second to figure out who'd hired him. I hadn't made enemies with anyone in this world except Marco. "Just accept it, boy. Losing an arm won't kill you." He thought I was frozen with fear. He thought this was going to be easy. "Sean." The moment I shouted, Sean exploded from the bushes behind the mercenary, swinging his iron sword like an axe. Sam. That was his name. I remembered now. The man who'd been arguing with Peyton, rolled sideways on pure instinct. The blade slammed into the ground where he'd been standing. "These brats have weapons." Sean charged in, hacking wildly. Sam blocked with crossed daggers, and his hands went numb from the impact. Sean was strong. But strength without technique meant nothing to a veteran. Sloppy swings like that won't last 3 breaths on a real battlefield. That's when I struck from the side. My blade caught his right arm, slicing a deep gash. He snarled, spun, and kicked me back, then went after Sean with a vicious dagger thrust aimed at his wrist. Sean tried to block, but Sam twisted his blade around the sword and kneed him hard in the gut. Sean dropped to the ground, his sword falling into the dead leaves. "Your turn, clever boy." Sam shook his bleeding arm. I could see the pain was getting to him. I didn't wait. I closed in fast, my sword aimed straight at his throat. Sparks flew in the dim forest as iron clashed against iron. His strength felt about equal to mine. The wound was draining him. Every strike I threw targeted a vital spot: throat, heart, eyes. My maxed-out basic swordsmanship guided each attack with a precision I couldn't have managed even yesterday. How is this kid's swordplay so polished? Sam was retreating, blood streaming from his arm, his daggers groaning under the weight of my iron blade. His vision was going dark at the edges. When his back hit an oak tree, desperation took over. He deliberately left an opening. When I thrust at it, he threw himself forward, dagger driving straight at my chest. Clang. His blade hit metal. The crude heart guard, the iron plate I'd forged and kept strapped under my clothes. His eyes went wide. In that same instant, my sword found his throat. He dropped to his knees, clutching his neck as blood poured between his fingers. His mouth moved, but no words came. The smell of damp earth and rotting leaves filled the air. His eyes, going glassy, stared up at me, and I stared back, my heart hammering, my hands steady, my vision sharp and dark. I drove my sword into Sam's chest one final time to make sure he was dead, then stumbled backward and collapsed onto the ground. The adrenaline was draining out of me, and my legs had gone soft. I ran my fingers over the dent in the iron plate strapped to my chest. If that crude heart guard hadn't been there, his dagger would have punched through my heart before my blade ever reached his throat. Even with maxed-out basic swordsmanship and the advantage of wounding his arm while he fought Sean, it had been close. Too close. I was missing real combat experience. I should have been able to react to that desperate lunge. Roland. Sean came stumbling through the trees. Are you okay? I'm fine. He checked every inch of me, and only when he was sure I wasn't hurt did his shoulders finally drop. Then he noticed the body on the ground, and his face went white. He's dead? Looks like it. While Sean stood there shaking, I forced myself to kneel beside Sam's corpse and search it. The smell of blood was awful, but I needed evidence. If I could prove Marco was behind this, Hawk would throw him out of the estate without a second thought. I sent Sean to keep watch, then started going through Sam's things. The first thing I found was a sketch, my own face drawn on paper, with my name written underneath. I tore it to shreds. Then I found a heavy cloth pouch. My hands trembled when I opened it. 1, 2, 3, 8 silver coins. A fortune. I had maybe a dozen coppers to my name. But beyond that, no letter, no note, nothing connecting this to Marco. The man had been careful enough not to leave a trail. When Sean came back and I told him there was no proof, but it had to be Marco, he exploded. His eyes went red, his knuckles went white around his sword, and he tried to charge off to kill Marco right then and there. I grabbed his arm. Stop. Think about your father. Do you want Gary to spend the rest of his life known as a murderer's dad? That froze him. His sword lowered slowly, but the anger was still burning. Then what? Just let it go? What if he tries again? Maybe I should skip enlisting and stay at the estate to protect you. No. I looked him straight in the eyes. Marco's family is powerful. If he really wants me dead, you can't stop him by standing next to me. You'll just get yourself killed too. But if you enlist and impress Knight Beckham, if you become someone important, even Marco's father, famous as he is, wouldn't dare cross a knight or anyone close to one. Sean started to argue, but I cut him off with a grin. What? You don't think you can do it? Of course I can, he shot back, then caught himself and sighed. Fine. Maybe you're right. Besides, I added, you said it yourself. Marco wouldn't dare try anything inside the estate. We buried the body. I stripped Sam's worn leather armor off him first. No point wasting it. Then I pulled out the coin pouch and shook it. 8 silver coins clinked together. We split it. Sean looked away, jaw tight. You killed him. I couldn't even hold onto my sword. He wouldn't budge, so I sighed and pushed the leather armor and the daggers into his arms instead. Then take these. I can't use them inside the estate anyway. He gave in and started pulling the armor on. Then he stopped and made a confused sound, feeling around inside the lining. What's this? Hey, look at this. He pulled out a rolled-up piece of yellowed parchment from a hidden pocket in the armor. The edges were stained with old, dark blood. Sean squinted at it, scratched his head, and handed it over sheepishly. You read it. I can't make out half these words. I took the brittle parchment and held it close. The ink had faded badly, and the writing was cramped and old. I traced the lines with my finger, frowning, mouthing words, trying to piece it together. Finally, I spoke. I think this is some kind of potion recipe. In the Golden Valley Kingdom, most commoners could barely write their own names. Sean and I were considered educated just because we'd attended a free church school as kids. But even between the two of us, we couldn't make sense of that parchment. I traced my fingers over the faded ink again and again, and all I could pick out were a couple of herb names, silver leafgrass and nightshade vine. The rest was completely beyond me. It was the first time since coming to this world that I truly felt how important literacy was. The parchment looked ancient, and someone had gone through the trouble of sewing it into the armor's lining. It had to be valuable. Sean gave up and flopped onto the ground. My brain hurts. You keep it. If I held on to it, I'd never figure it out. I didn't argue. We checked the area one last time and headed back toward the estate, making it before noon without any more trouble. At the gate, Sean spent forever fussing over me like a worried mother, telling me to stay safe, to find his father or Uncle Peyton if anything happened, that he'd already spoken to them before leaving. Finally, he shut up, waved goodbye, and walked off toward the recruitment post. I watched him disappear down the road, took a deep breath, and stepped through the estate gates. I hid my things in a secret spot and hurried to the smithy. The moment I walked in, I felt dozens of eyes lock onto me. One gaze burned hotter than the rest. Marco was staring at me, his freckled face twisted with fury, teeth grinding so hard I could hear them. He couldn't understand how I'd come back without a scratch. That confirmed everything. He was the one who'd hired Sam. I kept my face blank and looked around. Half the apprentice candidates were gone. With the deadline approaching, many had given up, just like Sean. The ones who remained were mostly blacksmith sons, boys who'd grown up around forges. Several of them were nearly as skilled as Marco, only a step behind me. The relaxation from the holiday vanished instantly. "Put down your tools," Hawk's voice thundered through the shop before he even appeared. He marched in, hands behind his back, gave me a quick nod, then addressed the group. "I told you before the break. Today I'm testing your knowledge." He unrolled a sheet of cheap birch bark paper covered in dense text that made my scalp tingle. "Come forward one by one and read what's written here." It was a disaster. By the time evening fell, I was standing with my head down among a group of equally miserable boys. Hawk's shouting shook the walls. Meanwhile, Marco and his few friends who'd passed were off to the side, smirking and exchanging smug looks. Hawk's face was purple, veins bulging on his neck. "You blockheads. You can't even read a basic contract clause. How are you going to negotiate with merchants? Calculate or prices?" He slammed the paper onto the anvil. "If delivered goods fail to meet standards, the deposit shall be repaid twofold." You couldn't even get through that sentence. You didn't even recognize the word repay, he sneered at us. A vegetable seller on the street could swindle you out of everything you own. You want to make it as blacksmiths? Go dig dirt instead. Dead silence. Only the fire crackling. Then a timid voice broke through. "Master Hawk, should I come back later?" "No, Mr. Brownson, your timing is perfect." Hawk swallowed his rage and growled at us. "Look up, fools. This is Mr. Brownson. He'll be teaching you to read and write." I raised my head. Standing beside Hawk was a tall but painfully thin man, about 30 years old. He hunched his shoulders, drowning in an oversized gray robe, nervously clutching his messy brown hair. Every time Hawk raised his voice, the man flinched and shrank into the shadows like a startled bird. Some of the boys started whispering, "This guy's supposed to teach us. I heard he came from the capital, followed nobles around begging for research funding, all the way out here." The capital? Research funding? Those words caught my ear, but I didn't dwell on them. My mind was already racing with calculations. Marco's group had passed the literacy test and could now focus entirely on improving their forging. I had to split my time learning to read. That gap could let those blacksmith sons catch up to me, or even surpass me, and I still needed to train my strength and meet the requirements for the blacksmith class upgrade. The exam was 2 months away. Time was getting tight. "Shut up, all of you." Hawk clapped his hands like thunder. "You have 1 month. Anyone who still can't pass the literacy test after that packs their bags and leaves." Understood. 3 days after the festival, the sky was gray and heavy. Out on the open ground near the smithy, I sat with the other boys who'd failed the literacy test, listening to Mr. Brownson teach us to read and write. I held a stick in one hand, scratching letters into the dirt as he spoke. I could tell Brownson noticed me. Unlike the other boys who barely paid attention, I'd been focused every single lesson for 3 days straight, and I always stayed after to ask him questions. He called me up to read aloud from a cloth sheet. I stumbled through it badly. In the era, the night followed. To fight the dragon, and then the other boys burst out laughing. Brownson tried to quiet them down, but they ignored him completely. He can't even read A Knight's Tale, and he wants to be an apprentice? Some country boy. Amazing he knows any letters at all. These kids had been jealous of Hawk's favoritism toward me for a while now. They weren't going to pass up a chance to mock me. Brownson looked at me with an apologetic expression, clearly embarrassed he couldn't control the class. But I didn't care about the laughter. I just kept reading, word by painful word, until I finished the whole passage. Then I bowed slightly and handed the sheet back. "Very good," Brownson said softly, relief on his face. "Keep it up. You're actually improving faster than anyone else." He wasn't lying. I was learning quicker than the others. But my foundation was so weak that even fast progress might not be enough to pass Hawk's test in time. I went back to my spot and kept studying, listening to Brownson's explanations while scratching letters in the dirt over and over. I lost track of time completely. Then the bell rang, and golden text blazed across my vision. Skill acquired. General knowledge, level 1. Detection complete. You may now take the basic class, Scholar. Requirements. Spirit 0.8, level 1 general knowledge. Accept class? I couldn't believe it. Learning to read had triggered a skill? Before this, every skill I'd gained, bellows pulling, forging, swordsmanship, had been a physical, hands-on thing. But now something as abstract as literacy could activate the system too. That completely changed what I thought was possible. Accept class, Scholar. Class accepted. Current class, Scholar. Attribute bonus, Spirit 0.5. Trait acquired, Focus. Focus, when actively triggered, enter a state of extreme mental concentration. Duration depends on spirit attribute. An active trait, one I could turn on and off. I'd expected something passive like the others. Maybe, learn things faster or something. This was different. I activated it immediately. The world shifted. The chattering boys faded into a distant hum. Brownson's raspy voice grew muffled, as if heard through thick glass. Everything slowed down and went quiet. I looked down at the cloth sheet in my hands, and the texture under my fingertips became incredibly sharp. I could feel differences in how the ink had soaked into different parts of the fabric. Those messy, confusing letters began breaking apart into clear strokes and structures, then flooded into my brain as if they'd come alive. You have successfully studied general knowledge. 1 experience. You have successfully studied general knowledge. 1 experience. You have successfully. The messages kept coming, one after another. I don't know how long I sat there, completely lost in that state of hyper-focus, devouring everything on the page. Then a thin hand touched my shoulder, and I snapped out of it. Before I could even look up to see who it was, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through my skull. Roland, are you all right? Brownson was staring at me with a worried frown. I was pressing my temples so hard my knuckles had gone white. That stabbing headache was unlike anything I'd felt before, like needles being driven into my brain. I forced a weak smile. I'm fine. Just got a little too absorbed in studying. Brownson didn't look convinced. He seemed to recognize the symptoms, like he'd seen this kind of thing before, but he didn't press me. He just told me everyone else had gone to the dining hall, and I should head there too. Wait, Mr. Brownson. I pulled myself off the ground and took out a cloth sheet I'd prepared earlier. I'd copied down words from the parchment we found in Sam's armor, but scrambled their order so it wouldn't look suspicious. Could you help me with these? This had become our routine over the past 3 days. He took the sheet and patiently explained every word while I memorized each one, headache and all. When he finished, I bowed. Thank you, sir. He gave me a kind smile. You're a good student, Roland. Even if you don't pass the apprentice exam, keep that curiosity alive. You'll go far. After he left, I slumped against a tree and checked my stats. My eyes snapped wide open. In less than 5 minutes of using the focus trait, my general knowledge skill had gained 32 experience points. 5 minutes. 32 points. The state I'd entered was incredible. It didn't just help with reading, it would probably supercharge learning in any field. The only problem was duration. With my current spirit attribute, the focus state burned out almost instantly, and the mental backlash was brutal. I needed to find a way to raise my spirit. But first, food. My stomach felt emptier than it had ever been, like my whole body was screaming for fuel. The moment I walked into the dining hall, the smell of real meat hit me. Today's meal was special, big chunks of meat and a full bowl of broth. The other boys were ecstatic. Is the Baron going to feed us meat every day? Don't get excited. I heard young Master Dalco got angry at his horse during a hunt and had it slaughtered. That's where the extra meat came from, Dalco. I knew that name well. Before coming to the smithy, the original Roland had worked as a stable boy, and Dalco was the young nobleman he'd served. Unlike his father the Baron, Dalco was wild about hunting and fighting. He was flashy and loose with money. Those dozen copper coins I'd had in my pocket when I arrived were tips Dalco had given the original Roland for good work with the horses. But that life had nothing to do with me anymore. I drained my last mouthful of broth, hurried back to the bunkhouse, empty now that most of the candidates had quit, and locked the door. I spread out the blood-stained parchment from Sam's armor alongside the cloth sheets where I'd been practicing my letters. Using everything Brownson had taught me over the past few days, I started decoding the text, matching characters I recognized to the ones on the parchment. The forge bell rang. Time for the apprentices to report to the smithy. But that didn't apply to me anymore. Hawk's rule was clear. No one who failed the literacy test could set foot in the smithy until they passed the makeup exam. While Marco and the others were in there honing their forging skills, I was stuck here with letters. By the time evening fell, I'd finally cracked every word on the parchment. Mithril, body tempering method. I rubbed my aching eyes and read it again to make sure. Then I couldn't hold back a gasp. This is a body-strengthening technique. Sean had always been obsessed with knights and loved sharing everything he'd heard about their training. According to him, becoming a true knight required two things: a breathing method to condense something called a life seed, and a body-tempering technique to strengthen the physical form. Both were essential. I'd always assumed Sean was just repeating nonsense from cheap knight novels. But here in my hands was proof that at least part of it was real. I guess the bard stories aren't all made up after all, I murmured, running my fingers over the faded ink. Every legend has to grow from a seed of truth. I lowered my head and began reading the mithril body tempering method from the very beginning, word by word. The mithril body tempering method wasn't what I'd expected. There were no exercises or physical drills. It was more like a special potion recipe. You ground up various ingredients into powder, mixed them together, and rubbed the mixture over your whole body. Then, you need to combine it with a breathing method for full effect. I frowned at that last line on the parchment and sighed. A breathing method was something knights used, way beyond my reach. But even a reduced effect was better than nothing. According to the description, this technique could significantly boost strength and toughness, exactly what I needed. And I was still short on strength for the blacksmith class upgrade. I carefully copied down the ingredient list. Silver leaf grass, nightshade vine. Those I recognized from when the original Roland used to buy medicine for his sick father. Expensive, but available. But then there was something called silver dust. I'd never heard of it, and the recipe called for a lot of it. By the time I'd finished studying, my stomach was growling. I headed to the dining hall and found it nearly empty. Dinner had ended a while ago. But one person was still there, eating cold food alone on a bench. Mr. Brownson? This was my chance. Over just 3 days, I'd noticed this quiet teacher knew far more than he let on. Maybe he'd know what silver dust was. I grabbed what little food was left and sat down next to him. We exchanged small talk, and then I asked casually, "There's something in that novel you gave us that made me curious. Something called silver dust. Do you know what that is?" His hand stopped moving. His gaze drifted, like he was remembering something from long ago. Then he spoke slowly. "It's a common material in alchemy." But he turned to me with a knowing smile. That kind of specialized alchemical knowledge wouldn't normally appear in a novel meant for entertainment, would it? My spoon froze in midair. Those mild eyes had suddenly turned sharp. This timid, mousy teacher was not as simple as he seemed. "Don't be nervous," he said, picking up his spoon again. "Everyone has secrets. I don't pry." He stirred his soup. "So, you need silver dust? No point hiding it." "Yes, I happen to have some." He paused. "But I'd need something in return." "What do you need?" He chuckled. Hawk was right. "You are clever." He set down his utensils and folded his hands. "I need a custom-made dagger. I hear your forging skills are quite good." "A dagger?" That was it. With my current skill level, that would be easy. But then a thought struck me. Why not just ask Hawk, who was clearly a better smith and someone Brownson already knew? As if reading my mind, Brownson smiled bitterly. "I can't afford Hawk's rates." Something about that explanation felt thin, but I let it go and nodded. "I can do it. But Hawk won't let me into the smithy until I pass the literacy makeup test." "Do you think you can pass?" I didn't answer right away, but I didn't look discouraged either. He studied my expression and gave a slow, meaningful nod. "Finish eating. Then follow me." We walked through winding corridors to the most remote corner of the estate, where a rundown shack stood alone in the moonlight. Brownson told me to wait outside and went in. Through the crack in the door, I caught a glimpse of books scattered everywhere across the floor, and on a stained wooden table at the back, strange instruments and equipment I couldn't identify. He came back out holding a cloth pouch tied with a silver ribbon and a worn-out piece of paper. "Here's your silver dust. And this is the design for the dagger." I'd like the finished product within 3 months. His lips curved into a faint smile, half hidden in moonlight shadow. I trust you won't disappoint me. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. Walking back to the bunkhouse under the moonlight, my mind kept circling around Brownson. Silver dust was an alchemy material, and he not only knew about it, he had some on hand. Did that mean he was some kind of alchemist? The only reference I had for alchemy came from night novels, where alchemists were usually portrayed as wizards, powerful figures who appeared as mentors or villains. But Brownson was so timid and broke. Could a real wizard end up working for a minor baron in the middle of nowhere? I didn't have enough information to figure it out, so I let it go. Whatever Brownson was, it didn't change my priorities. Then I remembered, when I'd taken the scholar class, I'd been so excited about the focus trait that I forgot to check for new class resonances. I opened my panel immediately. 2 new entries glowed at the bottom. Recruit Scholar Theory and Practice. During combat, you can perceive finer details in battle and gain bonus experience. That meant combat skills could grow not just from training, but from actual fighting too. I wondered if it stacked with the battle readiness trait's double experience. Blacksmith Apprentice Scholar Standardized Production. When repeatedly crafting the same item in a short period, success rate and item quality both increase. My eyes lit up. Normal blacksmiths always had to worry about luck, fatigue, bad, or damp charcoal could all ruin a piece. But this trait meant that if I forged the same thing over and over, each one would turn out better than the last. The only downside was Hawk's rule that the final exam gave you just one chance. Still, once I became an official apprentice, this trait would let me improve at an incredible pace. Over the next 10 days, I settled into a routine. I attended every one of Brownson's lessons as usual. Our secret deal might, as well, have never happened. Meanwhile, I experimented with the focus trait and found the sweet spot. 3 minutes on, 30 minutes rest, repeat. Each burst was short, but the concentration was so intense that half a day of focused study taught me more than 3 full days of normal learning. One morning, I unfolded a yellowed cloth sheet and began reading aloud in my empty bunkhouse. Black Iron or Trade Contract. Party A, Blacksmith Guild, Greyrock City Branch. Party B, Northern Mining Merchant Association. Every word flowed naturally. Those squiggly symbols that had looked like tadpoles just days ago were now completely familiar. When I hit technical terms, images of the corresponding ors popped into my head automatically. I even understood the business logic behind each clause. 10 days. That's all it had taken. The focus trait was even more powerful than I'd imagined. My literacy was now more than enough to pass Hawk's test. But before taking it, I needed to leave the estate and buy the herbs for the mithril body tempering method. As for Marco, he was too busy to worry about me. The other blacksmith sons who'd passed the literacy test were pushing him hard, and in his eyes, I was probably already written off as a failure who couldn't even read. I went to the smithy to ask Hawk for 3 days off. The sound of hammering and shouting greeted me before I even reached the door. Leave? What for? Hawk crossed his arms. Some personal business, sir. I watched Marco from the corner of my eye. Just as I expected, he barely glanced at me, snorted dismissively, and went back to hammering. The hatred from before was gone. I was no longer a threat in his mind. Hawk's eyes flickered with disappointment when I admitted I hadn't passed the literacy test yet. Listen, boy, you've got talent. But if you can't pass that test, I won't let you sit for the final exam. Understand? I understand, Master Hawk. He waved me off, clearly thinking I was looking for an excuse to give up. I thanked him, left the smithy, grabbed the pack I'd already prepared, and walked out through the estate gates. I made my way back to the village along the familiar forest path, but everything had changed. Shops were shuttered before noon, and frightened villagers hurried toward the exit with their belongings. The place felt half abandoned. At the tavern, old Lauren was packing up alone. I bought some bottles of wine, then asked what was happening. You don't know? He looked at me in disbelief. Monsters have overrun half the villages in the Morning Light territory to the south. And that bastard Baron Gavin. Instead of killing them, his army drove them toward us. On my way out, I saw a column of soldiers marching south. I recognized some of them. They were the Baron's elite guards from the estate, not conscripted militia. If even they were being deployed, this invasion was serious. I rushed to the herb shop before it closed, bought everything on my list, then headed to Sean's house. Peyton was leaning in the doorway, chewing on a straw, looking as lazy as ever despite the chaos around him. "What? You quitting the exam too?" he teased. Inside, Gary was packing to evacuate. I handed Peyton the wine I'd bought. His eyes lit up, and he took a long drink. "You're way more thoughtful than that nephew of mine. All right, what do you want this time? No point beating around the bush. I've mastered the basic swordsmanship you taught me. I want to learn something more advanced." I pulled out my coin purse, 5 silver coins, exactly his price. But Peyton pushed the money back. "I said 5 silver for a month of lessons for you and Sean. That sword you gave me already covered it." He drained the rest of his wine. "But we only have one afternoon. How much you learn is up to you." He led me to the backyard clearing, snapped a branch off a tree, and weighed it in his hand. "Basic swordsmanship keeps you alive. But this," the branch cut through the air in a vicious arc. "This is the lion swordsmanship. Standard combat style of the Golden Valley Kingdom's regular army. Built for killing on a battlefield." I barely had time to wonder how a supposed mercenary knew military sword techniques before he exploded into motion. The branch became a blur, thrusts, diagonal slashes, reverse cuts. No wasted movement, no fancy flourishes. Every strike targeted gaps in armor, throat, armpits, backs of knees. Dust swirled around him. Then he stopped dead, the branch tip hovering an inch from my throat. He wasn't even breathing hard. "Got it. Too fast," I admitted, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Could you show me once more?" He raised an eyebrow, but reset his stance. The moment he moved, I activated focus. The world went quiet. Everything slowed. I could see each muscle in Peyton's body flex, each breath he took, the exact arc of the branch through the air. Details I couldn't possibly have caught before now unfolded before me like a diagram being taken apart piece by piece. I didn't just memorize the movements. I understood the intent behind each one. Which strikes were feints, which were killing blows, which were designed to force an opening. When he finished, I spoke without thinking. "The third form's variation, that's not a simple diagonal slash. You adjusted your wrist angle midway. That's for getting around a shield block, isn't it?" Peyton's branch snapped in half in his grip. His perpetually sleepy eyes went round. He actually stepped backward. "Have you learned this before?" "No." Focus cut off and dizziness slammed into me. I grabbed the fence to stay upright. Peyton stared at me for a long time, then shook his head, tossed me a branch, and muttered, "Just show me." I reproduced the entire lion swordsmanship from memory. My power and speed were nothing compared to his, and the transitions between moves were a little rough, but every position was precise. He watched in silence, then let out a dry, self-mocking laugh. He slumped against a tree and waved me off. "I've got nothing left to teach you, kid. Just practice until it's smooth." Golden text appeared, skill acquired. Lion swordsmanship, level 1. The focus trait wasn't limited to book learning. It worked for physical skills too. But the cost was steep. Just 2 minutes of focus on something this complex drained more mental energy than 5 minutes of studying text. My head was throbbing. I dragged myself over to the shade next to Peyton and leaned against the trunk. "Just need a quick rest." I closed my eyes and exhaustion swallowed me whole. I don't know how long I slept. A piercing scream ripped me awake. The sky had gone completely dark, except to the south, where it glowed orange. Smoke billowed upward, backlit by fire. I lurched to my feet. The smell of blood hit me immediately. Then came the screaming, not just human voices, but bestial roars, and underneath it all, a chewing sound. My blood froze. "Kid, you sure sleep hard." I jolted awake to Peyton's harsh voice. He was staggering toward me, drenched in blood from head to toe. Dark red drops clung to his beard. He smeared his face with one hand, which only made it worse. "Grab your weapon. Now." I scrambled up, pulled my iron sword from the pack he tossed me, and looked around. The sky to the south was glowing orange, thick smoke rolling upward. The stench of blood hit my nose immediately, mixed with screaming, animal-like roars, and something else. A wet, crunching sound. "What happened? What do you think?" Peyton spat on the ground. "Those monsters from the Morning Light territory. They're here." A sharp crack came from behind the fence. 3 hunched figures scrambled over the wooden barrier. They were about half my height, covered in rough brown fur, with the heads of dogs sitting on human-like bodies. Yellow slit eyes glowed in the darkness. "Kobolds." I'd heard about them 100 times since coming to this world, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. My heart hammered against my ribs. Right one's yours. I'll take the two on the left. Peyton was already charging before he finished speaking. I steadied my breathing, raised my sword into the lion swordsmanship opening stance, and locked eyes with my target. The kobold gripped a rusty hand axe, tilted its head at me curiously, then lunged with a snarl. I sidestepped and blocked. The impact nearly ripped the sword from my hands. That's a lot of raw strength. I backed off half a step. The kobold pressed forward, 3 savage chops in a row. I parried each one, but on the third block I deliberately softened my resistance and used the rebound to leap backward. That's when I noticed it. The creature had to pause and catch its breath after each swing, and its turns were clumsy. Strong but slow. I changed tactics. The next time the axe came at me, I ducked under it instead of blocking, and my blade sliced across its ribs. It howled and attacked even more wildly, but wilder meant sloppier. I circled it like a bullfighter, every strike aimed at a vital point. When it overcommitted on a heavy chop and missed, I stepped in and drove my sword through its throat. Hot blood sprayed across my face. Golden text flashed. Combat experience gained. Lion swordsmanship 3 experience. The theory and practice resonance. It worked. But I didn't have time to think about that. I looked over and saw Peyton being pushed back by the other 2 kobolds. I rushed in and caught one with a diagonal slash across its shoulder. It screeched, and its partner abandoned Peyton to swing a spiked club at me. Drawing on what I'd just learned, I sidestepped the heavy blow and cut across its knee. As it collapsed, I reversed my blade and opened its throat. Peyton recovered and stabbed the injured one through the heart from behind. "Nice work," he called out, but his eyes betrayed his shock. He gave me a quick pointer. "Next time, aim for the armpit to temporarily disable them." I checked all 3 bodies to make sure they were dead, then noticed Peyton's left arm. A gash ran deep enough to show bone, his sleeve soaked dark with blood. "Just a scratch," he grunted. More howling echoed from somewhere close. Peyton's face went hard. He pulled me inside the house where Gary was already packed and waiting by the door with a hunting bow. He bolted the door behind us. "The east granary's on fire," Gary said, voice tight. "At least 20 kobolds are ransacking the market." "Way more than 20, Peyton muttered, wrapping his wound with a torn strip of cloth. "They're organized. Something bigger is commanding them." I peered through a crack in the window shutters. My stomach lurched. The whole village was burning, a dozen fires painting the night sky red. Kobolds roamed the streets in packs, breaking down doors. An old man who'd fallen behind was dragged down by 3 of them, his screams turning into that horrible chewing sound. Further away, a few villagers fought back with pitchforks, but a larger kobold with a rusted sword cut through them in seconds. Gary cursed, ripped up a floorboard, and pulled out a hidden chest. 2 gleaming hunting knives went onto his belt. "Back door is clear for now. What's the plan?" "The estate," I said before Peyton could answer. "Head for the Baron's estate. There'll be guards stationed there, and behind those stone walls, the kobolds can't touch us." That place is basically a small fortress. High walls, arrow towers, strong defenses. These creatures don't have the weapons or the discipline to break through. Peyton nodded. "Do what the kid says." We slipped out the back door. I saw several kobold corpses scattered in front of the house. That explained Peyton's wound. He'd been fighting while I slept. We moved fast through the smoke, hugging the walls. Every time we ran into kobolds, Peyton and I worked together to cut them down. With each real fight, the theory and practice bonus kept feeding me experience. My lion swordsmanship grew smoother, the transitions between moves tightening, each thrust and slash more precise than the last. After turning 2 corners, I grabbed the other 2 and held them back. At the crossroads ahead, 7 or 8 bodies lay tangled together. Villagers and At the crossroads ahead, 7 or 8 bodies lay tangled together. Villagers and kobold. It was a kobold, but unlike any I'd seen. This one was enormous, towering over the others. Its entire body was covered in blood-red scales that glinted with an eerie cold light under the moon. Ahead of us, a squad of soldiers in chainmail was fighting the red-scaled kobold. I watched from behind cover as a veteran named John slammed his sword into the creature's shoulder, and sparks flew. The blade barely left a scratch. Those blood-red scales were harder than iron. A red-nosed soldier called Tom rushed in from the side, aiming for the throat. The monster just tilted its head and let the blade scrape harmlessly across its neck. Then it swung one massive arm. Tom's oak shield exploded into splinters, and he went flying into a burning wall, blood pouring from his mouth. John ordered his last man, Lane, to circle behind. He faked a frontal attack and whipped out a short bow, putting an arrow straight at the creature's left eye. But the thing simply twitched its head. The arrow glanced off the scales covering its eyelid. Even the eyes were armored. Lane attacked from behind, but the monster spun like it had eyes in the back of its skull. One sweep of its giant axe caved in Lane's chainmail and sent him cartwheeling through the air in a spray of blood. Gary whispered behind me, voice shaking. "We should run. If those professional soldiers can't hurt it, we can't run," I said, gripping my sword. Peyton nodded grimly. The kobolds to the south were already closing in on our position. This was the only way through, and this red-scaled monster was blocking it. Peyton looked at me. Got a plan. Through all our fighting and retreating, he'd come to trust my instincts. He'd noticed things I caught. Enemy positions, flanking routes, timing, that even his decades of mercenary experience had missed. I gritted my teeth against the dizziness and forced focus active one more time. A few seconds of agonizing concentration, and then I opened my eyes. It's back. Left side. There's a small patch with no scales. One clean hit there should at least cripple it. Then we run, dead or alive. Doesn't matter, as long as we get past. Good enough. Peyton hauled himself up, face white from blood loss, and charged out of cover. This man who always put self-preservation first now had nothing but resolve in his eyes. His sword found a gap between the scales at the kobold's knee joint, grinding in with a sickening screech. The monster looked down at him with blood-streaked eyes and grinned. Actually grinned, baring jagged fangs. I sprinted forward and screamed at John. "Shoot!" The veteran didn't question it. He rolled to one side, dropped to a knee, and drew his bow to full tension. Peyton twisted his blade in the knee joint and drove it half an inch deeper. The kobold howled and whipped its tail at him. He ducked just in time. John's arrow whistled toward the creature's right eye. Just like before, the monster closed its eyes, trusting its armored lids to protect them. That was my opening. I triggered focus to its absolute limit. The world crawled. I could see the arrow spinning through the air, the twitch of every muscle as the monster raised its arm, even the trajectory of sparks drifting from the burning buildings behind us. 3 steps. My sword cleared its sheath. Moonlight caught the blade. Lion swordsmanship flowed through me. Pure killing intent, no wasted motion. By the time the creature sensed danger, it was too late. My sword punched into the soft pink flesh on its lower left back. Blood erupted like a geyser. The kobold screamed and thrashed its axe wildly. I knew the wound wasn't fatal. I pulled back immediately to get clear. I was about to yell for everyone to run when something stopped me cold. The blood spraying from the wound burst into flames before it even hit the ground. Fire swept inward, engulfing the monster's entire body. In seconds, the towering red-scaled kobold was shrieking inside a column of fire. And then, nothing. Just ash. As the flames died, I squinted at the remains. Something tiny was flickering in the embers. A small crystal, glowing with a strange red light, pulsing like a living heartbeat in the ashes. The moment the red-scaled kobold died, something changed. Every kobold in the village suddenly scattered, howling in their strange language, retreating into the dark forest. The screaming and fighting stopped. All that was left was the crackle of burning buildings and the groans of survivors. Peyton dragged himself off the ground, pale and confused. His wound had torn open again, and his arm was useless. While he recovered, I walked to the pile of ash where the monster had burned and picked up a small object from the embers. A blood-red crystal, no bigger than a fingernail, smooth as a gemstone, with amber lights swirling inside it like liquid flame. I slipped it into my shirt before anyone noticed. Footsteps behind me. I turned to see John, the patrol captain, limping toward me on a broken sword. When the firelight hit my face, he froze. He couldn't believe the person who'd struck the killing blow was a skinny teenager. He bowed painfully. "I'm John, captain of the Baron's 3rd Patrol Squad. May I ask who? You don't recognize me?" I smiled and stepped closer to the light. "I'm Roland, the apprentice from the estate. You checked my papers at the gate before the festival. His eyes went wide as the memory clicked. He stared at me for a long moment, then exhaled. I owe you my life. If you ever need anything, just ask. After we bandaged everyone up, Gary mentioned heading to the Baron's estate for safety. John shook his head. The Baron never lets commoners inside. During last year's famine, even our own families were turned away at the drawbridge. He pointed north instead. Knight Beckham is recruiting soldiers up there. With a real knight in charge, it should be safe. He handed Tom over to me. Take Tom back to the estate. With him vouching for you, the guards will let you in. I need to report to the front lines. His face darkened. We were posted at the border with Morning Light territory, waiting for the monsters, but they never came that way. They somehow got behind our defensive line. And that red-scaled one. I've fought kobolds before. They've never been this cunning, and they've never produced anything that powerful. He waved us off and headed south. I said goodbye to Peyton and Gary, and Tom and I made it to the estate without trouble. With Tom's word, the guards let me through. Inside, the apprentice boys were gathered on the open ground, staring at the distant glow of the burning village. Some were panicking, some crying. Marco stood silent. His family shop was in that village, but I'd seen it empty when we passed through. His father must have fled early. Smart man. I ignored them all, stumbled to my bunk, and collapsed. Between burning through my mental energy with focus and fighting for my life, I had nothing left. I was asleep before my head hit the pillow. Morning light woke me. The estate was quiet and peaceful, as if last night had been a nightmare. Then my hand touched the warm crystal in my shirt, and everything came rushing back. I studied the redstone carefully, but couldn't figure out what it was. I set it aside and splashed cold water on my face, thinking through what I'd learned. Against regular kobolds, I could hold my own. But that red-scaled variant was on another level. Even with Peyton and John helping, I'd only managed to wound it. Alone, I wouldn't survive a single exchange. I needed to get stronger. Fast. I opened my pack. The herbs I'd bought had survived the chaos mostly intact. Following the parchment's recipe, I ground each ingredient into fine powder with a mortar and pestle. The grayish-black mixture looked completely unimpressive. This is really supposed to strengthen my body. Doubts aside, I kept going. When I added the silver dust, the last ingredient, something extraordinary happened. The powder seemed to melt on contact, tiny silver sparkles appearing at first. Then the whole mass started writhing and contracting as if pulled by invisible hands. The dry powder turned wet, took on a silver sheen, and within a few breaths had transformed into a thick, mercury-like liquid that rippled gently in the bowl like something alive. I swallowed hard, staring at the shimmering fluid. After double-checking the parchment to confirm this was exactly what was supposed to happen, I stripped off my clothes and spread the silver liquid across my entire body. The first sensation was cool, like stepping into a spring stream. My tense muscles relaxed for one blissful moment. Then the pain hit. Every muscle beneath my skin clenched at once. It felt like 10,000 silver needles plunging into every pore, racing through my veins and into every limb. My body shook violently as the silver liquid crawled into my pores like something alive, then seeped back out carrying dark red impurities. With each cycle, the silver faded, turning back to grayish-black sludge. I could feel things being ripped out of me, from my muscles, bones, blood, somewhere even deeper. The pain came in crushing waves, but an invisible force held my body rigid. I couldn't even collapse. Golden text kept flashing, but I couldn't focus on it. My eyes were bloodshot, my vision going black, yet somehow my mind stayed painfully awake through all of it. My nails dug into my palms hard enough to draw blood. Finally, the liquid lost all its silver color, dried back into powder, and crumbled off my skin. The force released me, and I crashed to my knees. When I could think again, I checked my panel and nearly choked. 34 experience points from a single session, and my strength had jumped by 0.7 in one go. Before this, even with the steal through tempering bonus, it took me 2 weeks of hard training to gain 0.1 strength. One round of the mithril body tempering method was worth over 3 months of effort. I looked down at myself. My muscles were visibly more defined, firm, tight lines where there used to be barely anything. My skin had turned smooth and clear, almost glowing. Even the small cuts from last night's kobold fight had vanished completely. And this was without the breathing method. According to the parchment, The effect was supposed to be much stronger with one. But night-breathing methods were closely guarded secrets of the noble families. Someone like me would never get access. Still, this was incredible. The skill capped at 100 experience, meaning I could do at least 2 more sessions. I was only a sliver away from the 4 points of strength needed for the blacksmith class upgrade, but my body needed several days to recover before the next round. I changed clothes and headed to the smithy. It was time to deal with the literacy test. Hawk was leaning against the wall when I walked in. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, and I noticed surprise in his eyes. "Didn't expect you to come back alive," he said quietly, then didn't ask about last night. "Can you read now?" "Yes, sir." He took me to a storeroom and handed me a yellowed cloth sheet. "Read." I scanned it once silently, then read the entire thing aloud, fluently, without a single stumble. When I finished, I even pointed out a few grammatical errors in the text. Hawk's eyebrows climbed higher and higher. "Good." He clapped his rough hands together. "I thought your forging talent was impressive enough, but this. Half a month ago you could barely stutter through a contract, and now you're correcting my grammar." He shook his head in disbelief. "You pass. Back to the smithy starting today." Then his tone turned serious. "But Marco and the others haven't been sitting around. They've been training harder than ever. If you want to win the exam in 1 month, you'd better be ready to fight for it." I mentioned Brownson's dagger commission, leaving out the details about silver dust. Hawk chuckled knowingly. "That stubborn fool. Fine, go ahead. But ore is scarce because of the war near the Blackfir Forest. I'll give you 3 iron blanks. Ruin them, and you pay market price." When Hawk announced I was back in the smithy, the hammering paused. Marco and the others exchanged surprised looks. None of them had expected me to pass the literacy test so fast. But they recovered quickly. In their minds, they'd spent the past month improving their forging while I'd been wasting time learning to read. They figured I was no threat anymore. Only Marco frowned briefly, but even he went back to work without comment. I ignored their smug glances, took my place at the corner anvil, and ran through the basics. Bellows, smelting, forging. Everything was still sharp. Then I pulled out Brownson's blueprint. The dagger he wanted was unlike anything I'd seen. The tip and pommel were normal enough, but the middle section curved inward and narrowed into a cylindrical shaft. That shape would test every forging skill I had. Worse, the cylinder needed fine grooves carved across its surface with a file. One slip and the whole thing would snap. I traced the pattern on the blueprint with my finger. Those grooves weren't random decoration. Some sections were dense as a spider's web, others wide and open, with subtle curves at the turning points, as if they were meant to guide something along a path. This is definitely not just ornamental. In the Golden Valley Kingdom, short blades and daggers were more than just weapons. They were status symbols. Nobles wrapped their hilts in exotic furs and feathers, and even commoners carved good luck patterns into theirs. But the dense, intricate lines on Brownson's blueprint were like nothing I'd ever seen. I couldn't figure out what those grooves meant, so I set the mystery aside and got to work. I fired up the forge, pulled the bellows, and started hammering. The first attempt ended in failure. Fine cracks spread across the cylindrical middle section of the dagger. Hawk had been watching. He picked up the rough piece without caring about the heat and studied it. "This kind of work. Even I'd have trouble with it," he said. "At your current level, don't waste your time. Maybe after a few more years of practice." The lunch bell rang, and everyone left. I stayed behind alone. I checked every mistake from my first try, grabbed a fresh ingot, and started again. The standardized production bonus helped. The second attempt went a bit smoother. But on the third firing, the familiar cracks appeared again. Failed again. The problem was the dagger's unusual shape. Normal weapons needed 1 or 2 firings to take form. This one required over a dozen, and each round demanded more precise control of heat and timing. Even focus barely helped with this kind of physical craftsmanship. With standardized production, I estimated I'd need a dozen or more attempts to succeed. But after my 3 free blanks, I'd have to buy, or with my own money. I weighed my coin purse, 5 silver coins. I couldn't afford to blow them here. I still needed to buy herbs for the mithril body tempering method. I'll figure this out later. Brownson gave me over 2 months. If nothing else works, I'll just brute force it with standardized production. Over the next 5 days, I split my time between forging practice weapons for the blacksmith class requirement, studying the blueprint, and training lion swordsmanship in my room at night. The other boys saw me hunched over a piece of paper instead of hammering and smirked at each other. They thought I was wasting my time. Meanwhile, my swordsmanship was progressing steadily thanks to battle readiness, doubling my training experience. But I'd noticed something. The 40-plus experience points I'd earned killing kobolds in actual combat far outpaced what I got from practice. Real fighting was clearly the faster path, thanks to the theory and practice bonus. There was another change too. Since practicing the mithril body tempering method, my body felt more coordinated. Sword forms that used to take effort now flowed naturally. The tempering didn't just boost raw strength. It improved muscle control and flexibility in ways my stats didn't fully capture. On the 5th night, I prepared the second batch of tempering medicine. I mixed the herbs into powder, added the silver dust, and watched the gray mixture transform into that eerie, living silver liquid. I braced myself, gritted my teeth, and spread it over my body. The pain hit again, but not as badly as the first time. Golden text scrolled past as impurities were dragged out of my flesh. When the liquid finally dried and crumbled away, I checked my panel. Strength, 4.5. Agility, 2.5. Spirit, 1.8. The strength gain was only 0.6 this time. The method was getting less effective with repetition. But my spirit had unexpectedly risen by 0.1, which was a nice surprise. More importantly, I now met every requirement. Except class, blacksmith. Advanced class available, blacksmith. Requirements: Strength 4, Agility 2, 3 max level forging skills, 10 tints acceptable weapons forged. Accept class? Confirm. Class accepted. Current class, blacksmith. Attribute bonus, Strength 2, Agility 1. A warm current gathered in my chest and spread outward through my veins, like the first sip of hot soup on a freezing day. This wasn't like the previous class changes. The 2 points of strength felt enormous. The power didn't feel forced onto my body. It felt like reclaiming something that had always belonged to me. I clenched my fist and my knuckles cracked. My arm muscles, which used to only show when I flexed hard, were now visibly defined just hanging at my side. I reached over and gripped the iron candle holder on my bedpost. With a faint metallic groan, the metal bent under one hand. Before, that would have taken both hands and all my strength. If I faced the red-scaled kobold now, I could at least trade a few blows on strength alone. Killing it solo was still out of the question, though those scales were just too tough. Then new text appeared. 3 max-level forging skills detected. Merging. Merge complete. Skill acquired. Basic forging arts, level 1. A flood of clarity washed through my mind. All those separate pieces of forging knowledge, smelting, bellows work, hammering, crashed together like rivers meeting the sea and fused into one unified system. Every technique, every material property found its perfect place in a new framework. When I picked up my iron sword, the sensation was uncanny. I could feel every grain of the blade's texture, every tiny flaw left during its forging, as if the weapon had become an extension of my body. Trait acquired. Heart of the Forge. Heart of the Forge greatly increases fire affinity and significantly enhances fire resistance. I headed straight to the smithy before dawn. No one else was awake. I lit the forge, pulled the bellows, and as the temperature climbed, I noticed something strange. The suffocating heat that usually filled the room felt pleasant, cool almost. I held my hand over the flames. Where fire should have burned, I felt only comfortable warmth. And beneath that, something else. A faint sense of the fire's mood, its rhythm. Like looking through frosted glass at a living thing. I couldn't truly communicate with it, but I could feel it was there. So this is fire affinity. I grabbed an ingot. The moment it touched my hands, I instinctively knew its weight and quality. That was the basic forging arts at work. I placed it in the fire, and instead of watching the metal's color to judge the heat like before, I could now sense the temperature distribution inside the ingot through the flames themselves. I pulled it out before its color fully changed, and it landed on the anvil in the perfect forging state. I started hammering. The rhythm came naturally, each strike precise. Firing, hammering, firing again. The cycle repeated until the shape on the anvil matched Brownson's blueprint perfectly. I quenched it in cold water, polished it, and there it was. Done, a strange, beautiful dagger with a cylindrical middle section. The piece Hawk had said would take me years to master. I'd done it on my first try after becoming a blacksmith. 1 finished item forged. Basic forging arts 1 experience. Only 1 point per completed item. With a 100-point cap per level, that meant a lot of forging ahead. And the blacksmith class hadn't resonated with any of my 3 basic classes. Maybe advanced classes couldn't resonate with basic ones. Heavy footsteps behind me. Hawk walked in, started to greet me, then froze when he saw the dagger in my hand. You actually made this thing? He snatched it from me, running his fingers along the blade. For a long time, he just stared at it. When he finally looked up, his expression was a complicated mix of astonishment and something like frustration. If I hadn't already set the rules, he said quietly, I'd take you as my apprentice right now. I mean your skill is already good enough? He grunted, then went quiet. I could see the wheels turning. It had taken him 40 years to reach where he was. I'd touched that threshold in under 3 months. But then something shifted in his eyes. The irritation melted away, replaced by something warmer. He chuckled to himself, muttered something about stars and passing on craft, and clapped my shoulder. Good work, boy. Keep preparing for the exam. I spent the next 20 days carving those intricate grooves into the dagger's cylindrical section. The carving itself wasn't technically difficult, but it demanded extreme patience and ate up enormous amounts of time. I worked every waking hour, stopping only to eat and sleep. I finished just before the exam date. That evening, I wrapped the completed dagger in rough cloth and walked to Brownson's shack in the far corner of the estate. I knocked. The door creaked open, lamplight spilling out around his hunched silhouette. Before I could say a word, his eyes locked onto my chest, and his pupils shrank. What is that you're carrying? I frowned, my hand instinctively moving to my shirt. Underneath it, resting against my skin, was the blood-red crystal, the one left behind when the red-scaled kobold had burned to ash. The red crystal had been giving off a faintly eerie glow ever since I'd found it, so I kept it tucked against my chest under my shirt. I had no idea how Brownson could sense it through fabric, but since he'd already noticed, there was no point hiding it. Besides, I had plenty of questions about the thing myself. That kobold bursting into flames still haunted me. I pulled out the crystal and held it toward him. Is this what you mean? His pupils shrank to pinpoints. His face cycled through confusion, shock, and finally deep suspicion. His hands trembled as he asked to examine it. I handed it over. He turned the crystal slowly under the lamplight, studying every surface. Then he stopped and frowned hard. Whatever this was, he recognized it. Where did you find this? I gave him a shortened version of the fight, the red-scaled kobold, the scales that no sword could pierce, and the way it burned to ash after I wounded it. When I mentioned the scales and the fire, something flickered across his face. Scales. Fire. He muttered, rubbing the crystal's surface. Mr. Brownson, what is this thing? He took a long breath, collected himself, and said quietly, This is a crystallized form of magical elements. Magical elements? He didn't explain further. Instead, he returned the crystal and changed the subject, inviting me inside. I followed, still full of questions, and unwrapped the dagger I'd brought. Your commission is finished, Mr. Brownson. He took the dagger and held it up to the candlelight. When he looked at me again, his tired eyes were shining with disbelief. I thought Hawk's praise was exaggeration, but this, his fingers traced the intricate grooves carved into the cylindrical section. You completed this in less than 2 months? And these patterns, you carved them all by hand. Of course, they're perfect. He caught himself getting too excited and forced a calming breath, but his fingers wouldn't stop tracing the lines. I simply didn't expect this level of work. Silence filled the dim room. Then he looked up with a strange hunger in his eyes. Roland, what if we made another deal? A deal, like before. My research has hit a wall, and I need an assistant. In exchange, I'll answer everything you want to know about that crystal. And he jumped from his chair and stumbled to a dusty bookshelf, frantically pulling out old leather-bound volumes. In seconds, a stack of ancient books sat before me. Their covers were cracked and faded, filled with twisted script that looked nothing like the kingdom's standard writing. I could barely make out the word theory. He smiled bitterly. The only thing I have to offer is that I've read a few more dusty books than most people. If you'll work as my assistant, I'll hold nothing back. Every question you have, answered. These books alone could change everything for you. I went quiet. The candle flame danced in my eyes as I waited. To anyone else, this might have seemed like a bad trade. But for me, It was exactly what I needed. Since arriving in this world, I'd been stumbling around blind, piecing together scraps of information from overheard conversations and cheap novels. I'd planned to take things slowly, but the kobold attack had shattered that idea. This world was more dangerous than I'd imagined, and I didn't have the luxury of time. Brownson's knowledge could fill gaps that might take me years to discover on my own. What exactly would I need to do as your assistant? I asked. His face lit up. He straightened his permanently hunched back, and for the first time since I'd known him, he actually looked alive. The work is simple, but first, he pointed at the red crystal in my hand. Let me answer your questions about this. He cleared his throat and began in a steady voice. You've read about wizards in those novels, yes? What made wizards legendary were their spells. Extraordinary, reality-bending magic. But casting spells required drawing magical elements from the environment. Hundreds of years ago, the world's magical elements mysteriously vanished. And with them, wizards disappeared from history. Then this crystal. I opened my palm, the red stone pulsing softly in the candlelight. I remembered clearly what Brownson had called it. A crystallized form of magical elements. That's exactly what puzzles me, Brownson said, his eyes locked on the crystal in my hand. He forced himself to look away and began pacing the cramped room, floorboards creaking under his shoes. Then he stopped. I once read something in an ancient text about the nature of this world. The details have faded, but the core idea was this. Everything follows a cycle. Flowers bloom in spring and wither in autumn, feeding the soil. Rivers flow to the sea, rise as clouds, and fall again as rain. Stars are born, burn, die, and their dust creates new light. He paused, tapping his chin. So I wonder, perhaps magical elements follow the same cycle. You're saying magic is coming back? I asked, turning the glowing crystal in my palm. It's only a guess, but I hope I'm wrong. His voice grew heavy. Because according to what I've read, this continent was a very different place before the magic disappeared. He described a world I could barely imagine. Trees hundreds of meters tall with glowing leaves. Streams of liquid magic that healed wounds with a single sip. Even ordinary stones could develop consciousness over the centuries. Wizards walked through cities and wilderness alike, building bridges with magic, healing the sick, changing the weather. Even commoners could borrow power from nature for small tasks, lighting fires, ripening crops. But then the magic began to fade, he said, his voice dropping. No one knew why. The people of that era called it the year of ending, because they knew their golden age was over. Wizards found their spells growing weaker. The glowing forests went dark. Creatures that depended on magic either died out or devolved into the sorry things we see today. He pointed out the window at the dark sky. The old records say the night sky used to shimmer with magical auroras, like veils of colored light. Now there's only starlight. Then his expression turned grim. But that era was also incredibly dangerous. The monsters back then were nothing like today's kobolds. They were enormous, cunning, some even as intelligent as humans. Every race, humans, elves, dwarves, had to unite just to push them back. I stared at the crystal. So if magic is truly returning, the monsters will adapt faster than we will, he said urgently. Other races need time to relearn magic, but monsters only need instinct. And the dwarves, elves, beast folk, they've been lying low since the year of ending, growing weaker. If magic returns, will they really let humans keep ruling this continent? I gripped the crystal until my knuckles turned white. The return of magic doesn't just mean the return of spells, I said quietly. It means the return of war. Brownson nodded slowly. The year of ending closed one era. We may be standing at the beginning of another. Silence filled the room. Then he seemed to catch himself, coughing awkwardly. The passionate scholar vanished, replaced by the nervous, fidgeting man I was used to. Don't worry too much, he stammered. Those were just old books. History is like a blank page. People write whatever they want on it. And even if magic is returning, it would take centuries to reach its former peak. By then, we'll both be dust. I nodded, but the images he'd painted lingered. Still, looking at my frayed sleeves and the muddy estate paths outside, this world felt like the Middle Ages, not some magical wonderland. If I hadn't fought real kobolds with my own hands, I'd never believe magic had existed here at all. I pushed it all to the back of my mind and looked up with a slight smile. Mr. Brownson, The things you just told me. I doubt even the nobility knows any of this. So who exactly are you? He flinched and took 2 steps back. Then he sighed, sat down, and spread his hands. Fine. Since you've already agreed to be my assistant, I'll tell you. I came from the tower, the place where wizards live, just like in the stories. But I was expelled because I could never master meditation. He tapped his temple with a bitter smile. And if you want to know more about the tower, I'm sorry. They put a seal in my head. A curse, basically. If I try to reveal any internal secrets, I die on the spot. Honestly, even my own memories of the place are getting hazier by the day. I wasn't particularly surprised. I'd already guessed he was connected to wizards somehow. He noticed my calm reaction and seemed almost annoyed that his dramatic reveal hadn't shocked me. Well then, what about you, Roland? Who are you really? I smiled. Just an ordinary person who happens to have a knack for forging. He couldn't get anything more out of me. I certainly wasn't going to tell him about my system. But true to his word, he wasn't the prying type. He let it drop, and we worked out a schedule for my assistant duties. Walking back through the quiet estate, my smile faded. Brownson's words echoed in my head. The monster attacks on the Black Fir Forest and Morning Light territory. The red-scaled kobold and its magic crystal. The possible return of magic, and everything terrible that came with it. I need to get stronger. Fast. I quickened my pace back to the bunkhouse, washed up, and went straight to bed. No tossing and turning, no lying awake worrying. I fell asleep within minutes. Tomorrow was the blacksmith apprentice exam. The morning of the exam, Hawk's booming voice filled the smithy as usual. Today is the day you prove yourselves. Baron Foslan himself will be here to observe, so you'd better give it everything you've got. The other boys tensed up with a mix of nerves and excitement. Even as blacksmith sons, they were still commoners. Having a real nobleman watch them work was a big deal. I felt more curious than nervous. I'd heard plenty about the Baron since arriving in this world. People said he was extravagant and wasteful, but from what I'd actually seen, the commoners in Blackwater territory weren't starving. If he were truly that reckless with money, life here should have been much worse. Footsteps approached, and a tall, thin man in an expensive velvet coat walked in. His face was pale with a slight flush, and he carried himself with that stiff, noble elegance. 2 armed guards flanked him, and beside him strode a young man with a strong, athletic build. The Baron's gaze swept over us like we were furniture, only warming slightly when it landed on Hawk. After brief pleasantries, he introduced the young man, his son, Dalco. I recognized the name immediately. The same Dalco whose horse I'd once tended as a stable boy. He was staring at all of us with sharp, evaluating eyes. Let's begin, the Baron said, then settled into a high-backed chair, propped his chin on his hand, and yawned. Dalco, on the other hand, watched us like a hawk. Listen up, Hawk bellowed. Go to your stations, study your blueprints, and forge your piece within the time limit. Your final score depends entirely on the quality of your finished product. I rushed to my workstation and looked at the blueprint. A 2-handed sword. My eyebrow twitched upward. This was significantly harder than a simple dagger or single-handed blade. Thicker body, longer edge, a tapered point for both cutting and thrusting, plus a precise crossguard. I activated focus for just a moment and burned every detail of the blueprint into my memory. While the other boys were still squinting at their drawings, I was already at the forge, loading charcoal, pulling bellows, heating the ingot. One fluid motion after another, no hesitation. By the time the others put down their blueprints, I was already hammering. What the hell? How is he so fast? He's probably given up. Look, he's not even checking his work between strikes. He knows he can't win, so he's rushing to get it over with. They comforted themselves with that thought and got to work. The smithy filled with the sound of hammering. I didn't hear any of it. With basic forging arts, I could judge the exact state of the metal just from the feel of each hammer strike. With Heart of the Forge, I didn't even need to open my eyes to sense how evenly the piece was heating in the furnace. Every skill, every trait, every bonus was working together in perfect harmony. Over by the Baron, Dalco's eyes had fixed on me. He leaned toward Hawk. That one. What's his name? Roland. Hawk's face was stern, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. Interesting. Dalco nodded openly. You know I'm entering the Knight Academy soon. With my abilities, passing the graduation exam and earning a knight's breathing method won't be a problem. But every knight needs a skilled blacksmith at his side. That's his decision to make, Hawk replied carefully. His forging talent rivals my own. After this exam, it won't be long before he earns full certification from the Blacksmith Guild. Once he's a recognized smith, where he goes is up to him. Dalco looked at me again, and this time the casual interest in his eyes had turned into something much more intense. I didn't notice any of this. I was already in the final polishing stage. When I finished, I ran my fingertip along the blade and flicked it lightly. A clear, resonant hum rang out, the sound of well-forged steel. I turned, lifted the gleaming two-handed sword above my head, and called out, "Master Hawk, my piece is finished." My voice cut through the hammering, and every sound in the smithy stopped dead. The Baron straightened in his chair, suddenly wide awake, studying me with new interest. "Nonsense," Hawk barked, though his voice softened at the end. "Did you forget procedure? Inspect it 3 more times. We'll evaluate everyone's work together after all pieces are complete." "Yes, sir." The exam dragged on for hours. One by one, the other boys finished their two-handed swords and lined them up on their anvils. Hawk walked down the line, inspecting each one. His face grew darker with every stop. Out of respect for the Baron watching nearby, he held back from his usual screaming, but his voice was grim enough. "Smelting temperature too high. Fail. Hammering force insufficient. Fail. Doesn't match the blueprint. Fail." Then he reached Marco. The boy stood tall, chin up, meeting Hawk's gaze with confidence. Hawk picked up Marco's sword and studied it for a long time, much longer than the others. Marco's chest swelled with pride. "Not bad," Hawk finally said. "Your force, rhythm, and placement are solid. The smelting temperature was slightly off, but you pass." Marco bowed and thanked him, then shot me a look full of contempt. In his mind, I'd spent the past month carving pointless grooves into a weird dagger instead of actually practicing. Talent meant nothing without daily training. He was sure he'd beaten me. Then Hawk walked to my anvil. He tapped my blade twice with his finger, and his eyes went wide. "Perfect. Pass." His voice boomed across the smithy. "Roland wins this examination." He clapped my shoulder with a rare smile. "You're under my wing now, boy. Don't even think about slacking." "Understood." "Yes, sir." Inside, my heart was pounding. Becoming the Baron's official blacksmith apprentice meant a steady monthly wage, a real social position, and the chance to keep improving my forging skills. Everything I'd worked for. "This isn't fair." Marco's voice cracked with rage. He was shaking, fists clenched white. "He's just some nobody." "My father is." Hawk didn't get angry. He just picked up both swords and slammed them together. The crash of metal rang out. When the dust settled, my blade had only a few shallow scratches on the edge. Marco's had a deep, ugly chunk missing. Marco stumbled backward, all color draining from his face. His best work, the finest piece he'd ever forged, and it wasn't even close. He glanced at the iron hammer on his anvil, then at the armed guards beside the Baron, and slowly lowered his head in silence. Hawk dismissed the failed candidates and told them to leave by nightfall. The Baron stood, gave me an approving nod, "Well done, young man," and left with his guards. Dalco lingered a moment, smiled at me, and waved before following his father. I'd caught snippets of his conversation with Hawk earlier. Apparently Dalco was about to enter a knight academy and wanted a skilled personal blacksmith. He had his eye on me. Hawk told me to pack my things and report to the East Smithy. Then he strolled off humming a tune, happier than I'd ever seen him. Alone in the empty smithy, I finally let myself clench my fists in triumph. 3 months. A normal person would need at least a year just to become an apprentice, and my skills already exceeded that level. But I couldn't afford to relax, not after what Brownson had told me about the world. I went to the bunkhouse, packed my bag, and opened the door. 15 boys were waiting outside. Big ones. I recognized their faces, the commoner kids who'd barely passed the literacy test. Some of them were the same ones who'd bullied me when I first arrived, back when I was too weak to fight back. This had Marco's fingerprints all over it. His plan was clever. Hawk's rule was clear: anyone caught fighting gets expelled. These boys had already failed the exam. They had nothing to lose. But if I fought back and got caught, I'd lose everything. Except the plan had one fatal flaw. I'd already passed the exam in front of the Baron himself. Hawk wasn't going to expel his new apprentice over something like this. And these boys had no idea how much I'd changed. Some of them had made my first weeks in this world miserable. I hadn't forgotten. I stepped outside and smiled. Looking for me. The biggest one cracked his knuckles and sneered. Think you're special because you cheated your way through the exam? Time to learn some manners. They had me surrounded, 3 behind, 5 on the sides, the rest in front. Organized. Rehearsed. The leader threw a punch at my face. I caught his fist in one hand. My fingers locked around his wrist like an iron vise. One twist. Crack. His wrist dislocated. Before his scream finished, my knee buried itself in his gut. His body, 80 kilograms at least, flew backward like a rag doll and bowled over 3 others. The rest froze in disbelief. They remembered me as the scrawny kid who couldn't even carry a bucket of ore. But after 2 rounds of the mithril body tempering method, a blacksmith class upgrade, and months of combat training, I had 6.5 strength. These boys were children to me now. Get him! They rushed me all at once. I sidestepped the first fist and chopped the nearest boy across the neck. He dropped without a sound. I ducked under a swinging stick, drove my elbow into the attacker's ribs. I heard them crack, and caught the falling stick in midair. One sweeping swing sent 3 more tumbling. Less than a minute later, the ground was covered in groaning bodies. The last boy standing was trembling so badly he'd wet himself. When I walked toward him, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted. From the shadows behind a tree, I heard Marco hissing curses. Useless. Where are the guards? They always patrol here at this hour. Right on cue, heavy footsteps approached. Marco burst out of hiding, waving at the approaching soldiers. Sir, they're brawling. He attacked them. The lead soldier frowned and marched toward me. Marco's face split into a grin. Then he saw my expression, and the grin died. Because when I recognized the soldier walking toward me, I smiled. Well, aren't you the tough guy? The lead soldier stomped over and nudged the groaning boys on the ground with his boot. Hit them any harder, and they'd be meeting the Heavenly Father. Want me to throw you in a cell for a year or 2? I just smiled. Captain John, when did you get back? His stern act crumbled instantly. John burst out laughing and slapped my shoulder hard. Got back 2 days ago. So what's all this about? I nodded toward Marco, who was standing frozen nearby, and explained my theory, that Marco had paid these boys to jump me, hoping the no-fighting rule would get me expelled. John clicked his tongue and glanced at Marco. Kid didn't come out himself? At least he's got some brains. Then he leaned close and whispered, So how do you want to handle him? Captain, I appreciate it. But his father Henry is the most famous blacksmith in Blackwater. Henry? So what? John waved dismissively. He's just a commoner with good hammer skills. His son starts trouble on a noble's estate. I deal with it by the book. What's Henry going to do about it? But we don't really have solid proof. Proof? John grinned. Toss him in the dungeon first. Proof has a way of showing up after that. Won't this cause problems for you? Are you looking down on me? He threw his arm around my shoulder. If it weren't for you, I'd be kobold food right now. This is nothing. He was right. Marco had tried to have me crippled by a hired mercenary, then set up this ambush. I'd kept a mental tally of every single thing he'd done. If it weren't for his father's influence, I would have dealt with him personally long ago. Now the opportunity had landed in my lap. I'll leave it in your hands, Captain. That's more like it. John barked at his 2 soldiers. Grab that one. Marco hadn't heard our conversation. He was still standing there confused when the guards reached for him. When he realized what was happening, he fought back. Years of swinging hammers had made him surprisingly strong, and the guards were hesitant about roughing up a blacksmith's son. They struggled to hold him. John strode forward, hand on his sword. Resisting, Marco's voice cracked. Sir, I don't understand. Why are you arresting me? Why? John pointed at the beaten boys on the ground. You trained alongside these people under Master Hawk. When they were being attacked, why did you stand there and do nothing? Marco's jaw dropped. Of all the reasons he'd expected, this wasn't one of them. But Roland's too strong. I would have just gotten hurt too. Coward, John roared. Nothing disgusts me more than a coward. He glared at his men. What are you waiting for? Do I need to do it myself? The soldiers grabbed Marco's arms in iron grips. His eyes went wild as it finally sank in. He glared at me and John with pure venom. You can't do this to me. My father is. John's sword pommel slammed into his stomach. The rest of the threat came out as a wheeze. Take him to the dungeon. Question him thoroughly. And if I find out you went easy on him. Yes, Captain. The guards dragged Marco away. John scattered the rest of the beaten boys with a bark and they limped off without daring to look at me as they passed. Once we were alone, John relaxed. I hear today was the apprentice selection. You passed. I did. Huh? Not only can you fight, you're a master forger too. He picked up my dropped pack and handed it over. Listen, I'm still on patrol. How about I come find you tonight for drinks? You're reporting to the East Smithy, right? Hawk probably wouldn't let me drink. At the mention of Hawk's name, John's confidence wavered slightly. Write his rules. Okay, you watch me drink. I'll bring good food. I laughed. Deal. I'll skip dinner and wait for your feast. After he left, I headed to the East Smithy. When I walked through the door, I stopped and stared. The forging hall was 3 times the size of the old workshop, gleaming iron workstations in neat rows, full sets of brand new tools at every station. My old training area was a shack compared to this. A tall, friendly young man named George introduced himself as one of Hawk's apprentices and showed me around. The atmosphere here was completely different. No cutthroat competition, just colleagues doing their work. The pay system was simple. Complete your monthly forging quota for base salary, do extra work for bonus coins. Most apprentices just did the minimum. This is basically paradise for slacking off, I murmured to myself. That evening, John showed up right on time, loaded with packages that smelled of roast meat and wine. He barged into my new private room, a huge upgrade from the crowded bunkhouse, set up a table, and got straight to business. So what did you want to ask me? I want to learn archery, I said, biting into a chicken leg. I hadn't forgotten his incredible bowmanship during the kobold battle. If that red-scaled monster hadn't been covered in impenetrable scales, John's arrows alone might have killed it. Archery? Done. He thumped his chest. Too late to start tonight, but we'll begin tomorrow. Let me explain the basics first. As he talked, I realized archery was far more complex than I'd imagined. Stance, breathing, finger placement, power transfer. Every detail mattered. As the night grew late, I asked one more question as casually as I could. By the way, Captain, what happened with those kobolds from the Morning Light territory? John's smile vanished. The easygoing veteran's face tightened, and he let out a heavy sigh. John's expression told me everything before he even spoke. I asked carefully, were you defeated by the kobolds? He let out a heavy sigh, drained the last of his wine, and slumped back in his chair. If we'd actually fought them, that would have been better. The truth is, we never even saw them. He explained that the kobolds kept slipping past their defensive lines, always attacking villages in the dead of night. By the time the soldiers arrived, the monsters were already gone, vanished like rats into holes. What made it worse was that they'd found goblins mixed in with the kobold raiding parties. Goblins were usually timid scavengers that stole livestock at most. Now they were carrying weapons and killing humans alongside the kobolds. John's fist slammed the table so hard the cups jumped. His eyes were red with fury and frustration, haunted by the things he'd seen. Blood-soaked huts, mangled bodies, orphaned children screaming. Eventually, the commander had to request war horses from the Baron and 4 mounted scouts to patrol day and night. That slowed the attacks. But the scouts' last report was troubling. The monsters were moving toward the Black Fir Forest. Knight Beckham is stationed there, John said, his confidence returning. Those filthy creatures won't last a day against him. After he left for his patrol shift, I sat alone, turning things over in my mind. The Black Fir Forest. First the monsters there had gone wild. Then the Morning Light territory erupted. Now all the creatures were converging on the same forest. After what Brownson had told me about magical elements possibly returning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deep in those woods was drawing the monsters in. But I didn't have enough information to figure out what. I decided to ask Brownson about it once I settled into my new routine. I fell onto my new bed, wonderfully soft compared to the old bunkhouse, and was asleep instantly. The next morning, I reported to the East Smithy bright and early. Hawk assigned the day's tasks, farm tools for spring planting. Compared to weapons, these were laughably simple. I knocked out my entire quota before lunch. Then golden text appeared, 1 finished item forged. Basic forging arts 1 experience. Farm tools counted as finished items. My heart leaped. I'd been worried that only proper weapons would qualify, which would have meant months of slow grinding. But simple tools like hoes and shovels were fast to make. I could produce several per day. I noticed the other apprentices had only made 2 or 3 pieces each and were already chatting in groups. George had told me the system was strict about tracking materials, so I couldn't secretly use extra or like before. But if I could help other apprentices finish their work. George, I finished my tasks. Want me to help with yours? Consider it thanks for yesterday. He laughed and tried to wave me off, but I insisted. He finally shrugged and let me at it. By lunchtime, I'd completed his quota too, racking up more experience points. Lunch was incredible compared to the old days. Fish soup, thick slices of cured meat, boiled eggs, and a pat of real butter for the black bread. I wolfed down 3 full servings. Ever since the mithril body tempering method, my appetite had been growing. Speaking of which, my body should be ready for the 3rd session soon. I needed to find out if the skill could reach level 3. I rushed back to the smithy and grabbed another apprentice's unfinished work. I was deep into hammering when hoofbeats thundered outside. A tall figure strode in against the setting sun. I couldn't make out his face through the glare. Hey, Roland. He threw back his cloak, revealing a head of bright gold hair. Remember me? Dalco. I started to bow, but he caught my arm and held me up. The strength in his grip startled me. He was noticeably stronger than me. Don't be so formal. He slung his arm around my shoulder. Are you free tomorrow morning? George hurried over, politely trying to explain that I was new and still had work to learn. Dalco's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind those amber eyes. Oh, but I heard Roland already finished more than his share of today's work. George started sweating. I stepped in before things got awkward. Whatever Dalco wanted, I didn't sense any malice from him. From the original Roland's memories, Dalco was flashy but not cruel. And if something did go wrong, I could handle myself now. George, it's fine. Please let Hawk know I'll be out tomorrow morning. George nodded reluctantly and walked away. Great. I'll come get you at dawn. Dalco clapped my shoulder hard enough to bruise, laughed, and swept out of the smithy with his cloak billowing behind him. I rubbed my sore shoulder, watching him go. Well, came John's voice from behind me. I turned to find the old soldier standing there with a knowing smirk. I had no idea you knew young Master Dalco. You know him? John asked. I shook my head. Technically, the original Roland had been Dalco's stable boy, but the young lord had clearly forgotten all about that. I figured he'd noticed my forging skills during the exam and wanted to recruit me, but I wasn't sure nobles in the Golden Valley Kingdom typically bothered courting commoners. I decided to stop overthinking it and deal with tomorrow when it came. Your patrol's done? I asked John. Obviously. He rolled his eyes and tossed me a short bow. Here. It was a plain birchwood bow, unvarnished, with a fraying hemp string and hairline cracks in the grain. Well used, but still functional. This was my first training bow, John said proudly. I turned it over in my hands, already thinking about improvements to the grip. Professional habit. Save the tinkering for later. Make yourself a new one once you've actually learned to shoot. He led me to a training ground on the northwest side of the estate. Sand floor, battered straw targets, wooden practice weapons on racks. He handed me an arrow and pointed at a target 20 paces out. Don't worry about the bullseye. Just feel the draw weight. Aren't you going to demonstrate first? I asked, hoping to use focus like I had with the lion's swordsmanship. John shrugged and casually drew, then put an arrow dead center. But when I activated focus and watched carefully, I realized something deflating. His form had no fixed technique at all. None of the fundamentals he'd taught me last night were visible in his own shooting. His skill was pure instinct built over years. Archery isn't like swordsmanship, he said. Stance, breathing, finger placement, there's no rigid standard. You adjust everything to fit yourself. And more important than any technique is feeling. Feeling, yes. Feeling. He closed his eyes, drew, and released. The arrow buried itself in the bullseye again. I shut. Focus wasn't going to shortcut this one. No elegant form to copy, no sequence to memorize. I'd just have to grind it out the old-fashioned way. I knocked my first arrow, recalled everything John had told me the night before, and released. The arrow nosedived into the sand several steps short of the target. John howled with laughter. Good power, but your feeling needs a lot of work. And you're way too stiff. Archery runs on muscle memory and instinct. Thinking too much actually hurts you. He adjusted my stance from behind. Left foot forward. Shoulders relaxed. Stop being a wooden plank. Then he told me something unexpected. Don't stare at the bullseye. Look at the whole target. Let your body learn the distance. When I stopped trying to aim precisely, my arm naturally found a better position. The next arrow grazed the target's edge. Progress. For hours, I repeated the cycle: draw, aim, release. Sweat soaked through my shirt. My fingertips turned raw from the bowstring. After each miss, I worked John's tips into my form, adjusting bit by bit until the movements started feeling natural. By sunset, I was hitting the target 3 or 4 times out of 10. Miles from the bullseye, but John was pleased. At this rate, you'll match a fresh recruit within a month. What was your first shot like? I asked, shaking out my sore fingers. He grinned. Way worse than yours. My first arrow nearly scalped the instructor. He chased me around the entire training field. We both laughed as the sun stretched our shadows long across the sand. Then John dusted himself off and headed out, telling me I could keep using the training ground. He'd cleared it with the patrol guards. After he left, I kept shooting until the sky was nearly dark. Arrow after arrow, my body slowly absorbing that elusive feeling John kept talking about. My movements grew smoother, my aim tighter. Then, just as the last light faded, golden text appeared. Skill acquired. Basic archery, level 1. Detection complete. You may now take the basic class. Hunter. Requirements: Strength 1, Agility 2, any level 1 archery skill, 2 survival-related skills, 0 halves. You do not currently meet the advancement conditions. Hunter. The new class wasn't surprising, but the requirements caught my attention. 2 survival-related skills, and I had 0. What counted as a survival skill? Fire making? Water purification? Identifying edible plants? Too many possibilities to sort through tonight. I gathered the scattered arrows and headed back. On the way, I stopped by Brownson's shack to ask about the Black Fir Forest situation, but when the door cracked open, he looked terrible, sunken eyes, labored breathing, a feverish intensity about him. And through the gap, I sensed something with my heart of the forged trait, a fire source inside, radiating agitated, unstable energy. 5 days, he said hurriedly, glancing back into his room. Come when we agreed, and I'll answer everything. Then he shut the door in my face. Whatever he was researching, it couldn't wait. I filed it away and went to bed. Dawn brought the thunder of hoofbeats. Dalco was already outside my door with 2 guards and 4 horses, dressed head to toe in hunting gear with a jeweled dagger at his hip and 2 finely crafted short bows in hand. Can you ride? He asked, slinging an arm around my shoulder. The original Roland had been a stable boy, so the body knew the basics. I mounted the gentle brown mare Dalco had picked for me, and after some awkward adjustments, the muscle memory was there but rusty. I managed to ride well enough to keep up. We're going hunting, Dalco announced, practically vibrating with excitement. So that's what this was about. He just wanted a hunting companion. As we rode, I realized this was a free chance to practice horseback riding, something that would normally cost a fortune. I split my attention between making conversation and improving my form. At a dense forest north of the estate, Dalco ordered his guards to wait with the horses, brushing off their protests about the Baron's safety instructions with an icy glare that wiped away his friendly mask for just a moment. Then the warmth snapped right back as he turned to me. Can you shoot? He pressed a beautiful short bow into my hands. You would, polished like glass, horsehair string, copper eagle engravings. Hawk's handiwork, clearly. Compared to John's battered old birch bow, this was a masterpiece. Dalco led us into the woods, reading tracks and broken twigs with impressive skill. Within minutes, he'd spotted a gray rabbit feeding in a clearing. Want to try first? I recalled John's lessons, that strange feeling he'd described, drew the bowstring, and released. The arrow punched clean through the rabbit's body. Not a headshot, but a kill. Brilliant, Dalco cheered. Golden text flashed. Combat experience gained. Basic archery 1 experience. Even hunting rabbits counted as combat? The theory and practice bonus was more generous than I'd thought. I remembered that killing regular kobolds had given me 3 points and the red-scaled variant gave 6. Experience scaled with enemy strength. Dalco spent the next few hours showing off his own skills, and I had to admit he was genuinely talented. His archery was only slightly below John's level, remarkable for someone his age. We bagged over a dozen rabbits and 2 deer-like animals. By the stream where we stopped to rest, Dalco pulled out his dagger and started skinning a rabbit with practiced hands. That's when it hit me. Would skinning count as a survival skill? Dalco, could you teach me how to do that? Of course, he seemed pleased by my interest. He demonstrated the technique, where to make the first cut, how to angle the blade between skin and muscle, how to work around connective tissue without puncturing organs. I activated focus and burned every detail into my memory. On my first try, I cut too deep and ruptured the intestines. The stench was awful. Second attempt was better but messy, uneven cuts, spots where I had to redo sections. Third time, everything clicked. Skill acquired, skinning, level 1. I checked my hunter class requirements. Survival skills, 1/2. My heart jumped. Skinning was definitely a survival skill. Incredible. Dalco shook his head in amazement. Riding, archery, and now skinning. You pick up everything so fast. Honestly, Roland, you should consider. Before he could finish, rustling sounds came from the undergrowth nearby. We exchanged a glance, set down our knives, and drew our swords, peering into the trees. Short, shadowy figures were emerging from the dense forest.